and Professional of Nigeria in collaboration with Information for All program as well as APCON with the support of UNESCO Regional Office Abuja. This is the 7th annual conference of ACSPN, and I have the honor to introduce to you the moderator of the second day of this meeting, Dr. Honora Shido. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, distinguished participants, wherever you may be around the world. For those just joining us, my name is Chido Onuma. I'm the Vice President, Non-Central Zone of the Association of Communication Scholars and Professionals of Nigeria, ACSPN, and I'm anchoring this event from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. On behalf of the advisory group, the Board of Trustees, the President, the Executive, and members, I warmly welcome you to Day 2 of the first virtual and 7th annual conference of the Association of Communication Scholars and Professionals of Nigeria. The theme of this conference, for those who are just joining us, is Communicating Identities and Nationhood, Promoting Inclusive Democracy Through Access to Information and Knowledge Society. ACSPN is grateful for the partnership and support of UNESCO, the Information for All program, IFAP, the World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology, COMEST, as well as the Advertising Practitioners Council of Nigeria, APCON. ASPN is committed to advancing the scholarly study and practice of communication by promoting and facilitating the pursuit of excellence in academic research and professional practice in Nigeria. ACSPN aims to support the process of shaping communication scholarship, training, and practice in Nigeria, whilst complementing the work of other bodies and similar aims and building on the potentials of the field of communication in Nigeria, conscious of the needs of the country for critical inputs from communication scholars and professionals to shape a future that will promote growth and development. For those who participated in Day 1 of this conference, you would agree with me it was stimulating. The deliberations began with goodwill messages from the president of ACSPN, Professor Lai Osho, who noted that the rolling back of democratic gains across Africa has exacerbated the crisis of nationhood. He called for the rejuvenation of media institutions to deal with this crisis. Mr. Alistair Shoyode, founder Ben TV London, was of the view that Africa has to create her own path and must have a strategy to market and empower her people. Professor Idowu Shobowale, chairman of the Board of Trustees of ACSPN, presented ACSPN's latest publication, Media Freedom, National Interest and Governance. He called for the introduction of a journal for the benefit of members. Professor Lanre Aina, IFAP Chair Nigeria, said IFAP was glad to partner ACSPN to tackle the problems of misinformation and hate speech. Mr. Momodu Laminso, officer in charge of UNESCO Multisectoral Regional Office in Abuja, who was represented, spoke on what UNESCO has been doing around artificial intelligence. The keynote was delivered by Dorothy Gordon, the current chair of UNESCO's Information for All program. She spoke on promoting inclusive democracy through access to information and knowledge societies. She highlighted the weaponization of algorithms and the need for citizens to be concerned about who owns the different platforms they share information. There were 3 panels. The first on media, artificial intelligence, nation states, and the future was moderated by Professor Lanre Aina. The second, flattening the information curve in the digital age, was moderated by Professor Adebayo Fayoyin. The third was reshaping identities and citizenship in the evolving media landscape in Africa, which was moderated by Professor Umar Pate, Deputy President of ACSPN. Day one ended with the presentation of a UNESCO publication steering artificial intelligence and advanced ICTs for knowledge society by Mr. Banu Payne, program specialist in the CI section at UNESCO headquarters in Paris, France. Today, there will be 3 panels, but before we get to the panels, we have the keynote on communication technologies and localized identities. It will be delivered by His Royal Highness Igwe Onora Nwuneli, Eze Malume I of Igweaku in Anambra State. Igwe Nwuneli is a retired professor of mass communication. He had previously served as professor of mass communication at Covenant University, Kenanland, Ota, Ogun State, as well as Nnamdi Azikiwe University, Awka, Anambra State, and the Department of Mass Communication, University of Lagos. Once again, my name is Chido Onuma, and I welcome you to the second and final day of this conference. It's my pleasure to invite His Royal Highness Igwe Professor Onora Nwuneli, Eze Malume I of Igweaku, to deliver his keynote address. Your Royal Highness, sir, you have 10 minutes. Hello.
Hello, we hear you, sir.
Okay, so we can go on with the keynote address, sir. Okay, save.
Seems
Your Highness.
He's muted. He's still muted. Prof, you need to unmute your microphone, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we hear you loud and clear, sir.
Okay, very good. I said to start with, I want to say thank you to ACSPN for the unusual job they are doing. 7 years is a long way. The younger generation has taken over the Association in Communication in Africa and moved it to higher levels. My participation in this particular conference, I want to show appreciation to Professor Yinka Son, Professor Owen EBA, and Professor Fayoyi for encouraging me and propelling me to make sure I appear for this conference. Thank you very much. I want to make a minute of intervention about the discussion yesterday. I observed, maybe I'm wrong, there seemed to be a slight confusion between misinformation and disinformation. And I think I want to try to clear that up a little bit, whatever it is worth. Misinformation is what it is, misinforming people without intention of, deception, which means I believe in what I say, I know it is true, and I say it might be wrong, but I say it because I believe in it. There is no intention to misinform. Whereas disinformation is based on deception. And the key person with the disinformation is the Chinese general Sun Tzu, about 1500 BC, that wrote the Art of War and talked about deception. Don't win by war what you can win by deception. And that's how disinformation came. And disinformation actually is intentionality, the intention to use information based on forgeries, half-truths, and outright lies to influence opinions of nations and of people. So basically, one has intentionality there, not to misinform. The other has a clear intention to lie through forgeries and half-truths. That's what I want to say about that. Now to my presentation on communication technologies and localized identities. In the 60s into the 70s, we witnessed the emergence of the concept of the global village, advocated by Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian philosopher and media theorist. He theorized the interconnectedness of people, urban and rural, interacting in a common communication or media sphere. When the concept of global village was taught then in schools of journalism, students were left to imagine what would be like, where instead of going to take a trip to the post office, an electronic post office email would be embedded in one's laptop. Laptops then were not even in existence. A world where the medium is a message, the world of communication and information superhighway, a world where traditional journalism and concept of gatekeeping in newsrooms will give way to social media style journalism without real gatekeepers. A world where anyone and everyone is a potential journalist and participants in information gathering and sharing in an interactive environment, facts checked or not. A world in which producers and consumers of information are now interchangeable. And a world of internet, global village, globalization, and localization. However, of significant interest to our discourse here are the new media platforms, especially the social media platforms such as Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, and Instagram. Social media is more relevant to this discourse since it seeks to examine more closely what the organizers of this conference identified as communication technologies and localized identities within the context of the media, the government, and the people. We view the concept of localized identities within the purview of local actors generating, disseminating, consuming, and sharing of information within the framework of globalization and the concept of the global village. We therefore intend to approach this discourse utilizing a few examples from an ongoing Nigerian case study. These are the role of government, the local person, and the media in localization of information. We'll start with that of government. Today, it is normal within the Nigerian federal government and the 36 state governments to appoint teams of what is known as special assistants in social media affairs. They are seen as social media warriors, the government attack dogs. Generally pretend to walk the thin line. However, many of them have a loud mouth. They lie through their teeth and spin the facts with doctored images with the harsh content. So the social media warriors are now even trained in the utilization of artificial intelligence resources to manipulate political information. This type of strategy, resources, and tools until recently were only available and utilized by the intelligence communities of major world powers. These world powers utilize this strategy to propel propaganda and disinformation to influence political leadership and governments in different parts of the world. However, this has changed now with the emergence of the internet, the new media, and has become a global affair. The International Cable Network made their debut on the scene and carried along the localized ethnic communities in diaspora as instant gatherers, consumers, sharing of home news, even in their local languages. With that transition, governments, political actors, and individuals at all levels, urban and rural, from developed and developing nations, became fair targets of various forms of information and disinformation. But the beauty of social media is the interactive environment it provides participants. However, some of these interactions are positive while others leave much to be desired, probably due to non-existence of gatekeepers. We train journalists man the online news outlets and management of news websites. The non and semi-trained journalists, the citizen journalists, also known as guerrilla, democratic, and participatory journalists, become producers of internet platform-based news, hard and soft news outside the established traditional media channels. The entry of affordable mobile smartphone technology within the reach of a localized identities, put into the hands of the common person the power and ability to collect and upload information about oneself and the community, even from local languages onto the social platform. WhatsApp platform enable the formation of discussion and chat groups with capacity to forward and share information across forums all over the world, a real interactive global village. Thus, the coming into being of the WhatsApp platform fully transformed the ordinary rural community person with little or no training in news dissemination into a very active citizen journalist. The Nigerian government has made unsuccessful attempts so far to legislate against upload, forwarding, and sharing of negative opinion of government on social media and failed. Now the media interplay. Trending presently is a controversial political encounter between Anambra State traditional rulers and the government of the state. The involved traditional rulers were seduced with thousands of naira and ownership of Lexus SUV by a local wealthy businessman with an axe to grind, to travel with him to visit the presidency in Abuja, to launder their grievances against the state government. While they were still on their way to Abuja, the local citizen or guerrilla journalists broke the story on WhatsApp platform with live video images of the traditional rulers who were openly counting and pocketing those thousands of naira. Within hours of the event, the video clips were in the smartphones of almost everyone in the state and outside. The story was of intense political and human interest value. It was like offering an American KFC garnished with Hausa kilichi spicing. Almost everyone, including traders, market women, taxi drivers, rural farmers, Nigerians and non-Nigerians in diaspora were viewing and commenting on WhatsApp. The national news media did not catch up with the story until State House Abuja released information that the presidency would not meet with traditional rulers and their facilitator. The story above beautifully encapsulates globalization, the exposure of local political power game captured by local embedded citizen journalists in real time propelled the local corruption news into the national and international sphere. This, I believe, could be said to be the extent and impact of modern communication technologies in the shaping of localized identities, mediated information, and nationalhood in Nigeria. I hope I did not exceed my 10 minutes. Hello? Anybody there?
Hello, thank you very much, Prof. We listened to your presentation. Are you done?
Yes.
I'm done.
Wow, that was quick and straight to the point. You saved us some time. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
There might be questions. The way we've been operating is for individual speakers to take questions directly in the chat box. But since we have about 6 minutes to go, I don't know if anybody has any. We were supposed to end at 1:15, but this is 1:09, so we have 6 minutes for any questions that you can respond to before we move on to the panel discussion. Anybody like to respond to Prof's intervention?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, man.
This is Dorothy Gordon, and I want to thank His Royal Highness for a very stimulating presentation. He mentioned some ongoing research. I did not catch the title of the specific research and the scope of that research. If he could reiterate that. And then while I like his story on this positive impact of citizen journalism, will they be studying the implications? Because what if they had used technology to create a fake video of something which hadn't happened? Do we have the laws, do we have the framework in Nigeria at present that would be able to deal with that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other contributions, questions, comments?
Yes, Mr. Moderator.
Okay, Professor Layosha, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to thank my former lecturer, Professor Wuneli, for the precise presentation. But my question relates to issue of regulation, and I think Dorothy mentioned it. In Nigeria now, we are grappling with the MBC code, with the fine of 5 million naira for any media organization, that offends that code in terms of hate speech. Now, my worry or my own, take is that how do you regulate something that you may not even be able to control eventually? One aspect of these new technologies is that they are beyond any local location. It's a global thing. So if somebody posts something from Mars and is considered hate speech in Nigeria, how do you come to regulate it? That is a major issue that I want Prof to, maybe can look at. I think it's part of what Dorothy mentioned, the kind of implications we have because of the global nature of this technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. We can take one more question, contribution in 30 seconds before I turn it over to Professor Wuneli.
Okay, I think mine would not be so much a question. It's a contribution to say, really, from what we've seen, there are good, positive contributions that we can have from the use of technology in helping to shape our identities, in helping us to monitor ourselves, and in helping us to keep in touch at the local level and also at the global level, and to aspire to be empowered. I think those are things that we really need to appreciate. And of course, the contrivance of the law and regulation is something that has been identified, really, really important to grapple with, especially because we know that it's a question of power. It's the contestation of power from both ends. So the government wants to take power when the people are actually asserting the power that has been given onto them by these new technologies that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. So, Professor Nora Wuneli, you have 2 minutes to respond to the comments and questions, sir.
Okay, thank you. I actually abridged my presentation. I was told we shouldn't go beyond 8 minutes. It's a much longer one that you see when I give the paper out. Starting from control, back in my paper, I gave an example of local control, where in a village in Anambra State, when the elders were told about the damage social media was doing to their village because of the comments, how the young generation utilize it to critique the people, they sat and issued a regulation that anybody from that community, home or abroad, that attempt to produce negative image of the community will be sanctioned. How they're going to implement it, I have no idea. Secondly, regulating technology and social media is difficult. Even the US Congress have problems trying to regulate it. Even Facebook has problems regulating themselves. So it has to be a way, and I don't think it's found yet. So we need time for people who has the capacity to think about it and sort it. But for now, I think it's free for all in the social media technology. It's haywire. We'll talk about citizen journalism, we'll talk about journalism, we'll talk about participatory democracy. It's free for all. I hear yesterday, I think Dr. Gordon talking about we need to train more journalists. Yes, journalists are trained, But what happens in the social media is not in their control. They have no control. It's news dissemination without gatekeepers. In the newsroom, you can control. Outside the newsroom, you can't. They say whatever they want to say, they lie against you, there's nothing you can do, except for a way now to start suing them for libel. You know, maybe that will work, but I don't think it's possible. So technically, regulation is a serious issue. The NBC code issue that Professor Son mentioned, I understood that that NBC issue, the code is fake. The NBC law does not allow the Minister of Information to issue that code all by himself. It didn't go through the Congress or the National Assembly. It wasn't approved. It's not part of the documentation. So the lawyers have debated it. And as far as I'm concerned, I think it's fake regulation. And if they don't pay, they can take them to court. They can defend themselves effectively. And the issue of scope of the research is a research I put in progress as a traditional ruler and as a communication research scholar. I saw what was happening in the environment, and I decided to do a personal research trying to study various aspects of how media is being utilized, or how the social media is being utilized, and what can be done about it. And this is my second year. I wanted to give it 3 years of data collection. I can write it up. It's funded personally also. But the issue of citizen journalism, I don't know how we can control it, because it's anybody and everybody. And that's what social media is. It's free for all. You say what you want, say when you want to say it, how you say it, no controls. You know, sometimes you fight back and the reply gets worse. You know, so I don't know.
Thank you very much, Prof.
The new territory. Yeah, so that's what I can say about it now.
Yeah,
yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. We once again glad to have you. And also to thank you for your presentation. If you have time, you can check the Q&A section. I think a few people have questions for you there. We'll quickly go to this first discussion panel on protecting fundamental rights and freedom of expression, lessons learned from COVID-19, and is to be moderated by Professor Victor Ayedun Loma. Prof, we're on schedule. If we can stick to time so that we have some 15, 20 minutes at the end for interactive session, that would be wonderful. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Chido. It's my pleasure to welcome our colleagues here to this panel, this first panel, titled Protecting Fundamental Rights and Freedom of Expression, Lessons Learned from COVID-19. The presenters are Professor Jonathan Rosen, who is a senior researcher, Africa Program, the Committee to Protect Journalists, Mr. Akinjimo, who is Executive Director, Development Communications Network, and the third person is Mr. Bumima Kinwa, who is the former UNFPA Africa Regional Director, and Professor Daniel Wali Awudia of the Delaware State University. You're welcome, gentlemen. I believe we will use the time most efficiently if we have each speaker speak for 7 minutes, beginning with Professor Rosen, and then going on to Mr. Makinwa and Mr. Jimo, and finally Professor Awudia. I just want to be certain, is Mr. Jimo around? I can't see his name on the list, on the participants list. If Mr. Jimo is not around, then Professor Awudia will take the floor after.
Hello, Jimo is here.
Hello.
Jimo is present, sir.
Oh, okay, excellent. So we go in this order: Professor Rosen, Mr. Jimo, Mr. Makiwa, and Professor Awudia. 7 minutes strictly, please. So Mr. Rosen, Professor Rosen, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and really a thank you to the Association of Communication Scholars and Professionals in Nigeria for inviting me to speak today alongside this impressive set of participants. I also want to note that as we speak about the fallouts of COVID-19, we're of course talking about a public health crisis that has claimed thousands of lives around the world. And to all those who have lost someone during the pandemic, extend my sincere condolences. Recognizing this, I'll jump into the focus of my presentation, which is three alarming trends that we at the Committee to Protect Journalists have documented over the past 6 months, and what they reveal about press freedom and freedom of the press today. So CPJ's reporting has revealed a crackdown. First, a crackdown against journalists reporting on COVID-19. Second, security forces' use of COVID-19 response measures as a pretext to attack journalists. And third, an expansion of government authority to control information, freedom of expression, and the press. Journalists have been consistently harassed, assaulted, and/or detained for reporting on the pandemic. Last month, the office of Senegalese newspaper Les Echos was attacked in reprisal for a COVID-19 story. In Nigeria, in June, federal agents detained Saint Nyampamo Onitsha after he responded to a summons referencing his COVID-19 reporting. He was then charged with a section of Nigeria's Cybercrime Act that criminalizes false information. In Sierra Leone, in April, soldiers assaulted and arrested Faya Amara Faya for photographing a COVID-19 quarantine center. They took his phone and allegedly kicked and hit him with their guns. He spent the next 4 days handcuffed to a hospital bed under police guard. Also in April, Abdiaziz Ahmed Gurbiya was arrested in Somalia after being summoned by police. State prosecutors alleged that his Facebook posts, which criticized the government's management of the pandemic, amounted to false news and offended the honor of the president. He was later charged with different crimes for these posts and convicted. In March, in Niger, as the scale of the pandemic was just coming into focus for the world, journalist Maman Kakatura was jailed for weeks for social media posts about a possible COVID-19 case. Authorities claimed the posts threatened public order. Government's coronavirus responses and the measures that governments have taken to respond to the coronavirus in general have been used against journalists repeatedly as well. In Nigeria, in August, journalist Sikiru Obarayese was assaulted by police after he photographed them enforcing mask requirements. In South Africa, in May, police beat journalist Paul Ntoba after he photographed them enforcing the lockdown. In Ghana, soldiers enforcing COVID-19 restrictions attacked 2 journalists in April, and in March and April together, Ugandan security personnel enforcing COVID-19 measures harassed or assaulted at least 6 journalists. We've also seen the proliferation of laws or regulations that claim to offer a remedy to the problem of disinformation, misinformation, or false news. In South Africa, for example, new regulations published in March criminalized disinformation. In April, Eswatini authorities issued an arrest warrant for journalist Zweli Martin Dlamini under new regulations concerning false news for his reporting on COVID-19. An Eswatini government spokesperson justified the regulations in a statement to CPJ with reference to the similar rules passed in South Africa. In Nigeria, new state-level laws have also been passed pertaining to infectious diseases. In late April, journalist Chijioke Agu was detained and accused of publishing false or damaging information, breaching the new Ebonyi state law. Every year, the Committee to Protect Journalists publishes a census of journalists behind bars for their work on December 1st. In 2012, the census documented only 1 journalist jailed on false news charges. Last year, there were 30. In 2018, there were 27. We know from our reporting how anti-terrorism or cybercrime laws have been repeatedly used against the press. Like terrorism and cybercrime, of course, disinformation is a serious challenge for societies. What must be guarded against, however, is the justification of legal harassment of the press under the guise of preventing false information or false news. In summary, the patterns I have just described reveal a blatant disregard for principles of press freedom and freedom of expression at a time when we need them most. Journalists play an important role in keeping people informed. Without a free press, the public's ability to make decisions amid the pandemic is hindered, as is their ability to identify and guard against abuses of power. Disregard for press freedom and the essential role of journalists in this moment is made even more clear by the ongoing imprisonment of over 30 journalists across sub-Saharan Africa. The detention of any journalist, even briefly, amid the pandemic, increases their risk of contracting this deadly disease. These risks are real. Journalists in Egypt and Honduras have died from the coronavirus, which they contracted behind bars for their work. Journalist Azam Can Asgarov died in a Kyrgyzstan prison in late July after having a fever that his wife believes was COVID-19. As we meet today, in Cameroon and in Eritrea, in Rwanda and Burundi, journalists have remained behind bars for months or years, some of them in pretrial detention, and all of their lives are at risk. With all this in mind, allow me to conclude by emphasizing that these challenges require active international solidarity with the press across geographic and linguistic lines. Solidarity in calling for governments to make press freedom a pandemic priority, and solidarity particularly in the urgent call for journalists behind bars for their work to be freed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Rosen. Thank you particularly for the precision in the time management. My apologies, Mr. Makiwa. Professor, please let's take Professor Awudia. He's got an urgent assignment that he's got to be away for. So please, with your permission, Professor Awudia, you are next.
Thank you very much. Greetings to everyone from Delaware. This is early in the morning, afternoon over there, or evening some other places. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this conference, an all too important conference. I have to send greetings directly to my professors, especially Professor Uneli. You see me for the first time, sir, maybe after 40 years of graduating from UNILAG. It's quite a pleasure to see you face, sir.
Thank you.
I also greet my colleagues whose names I can see all over the screen here. I'm very, very happy to be here with you. I'm sorry I have another presentation in 40 minutes, so I'm going to go over my presentation quickly. I see that citizen journalism to the world we live in today is an irritant, and COVID-19 pandemic is a pretext, especially for autocratic rulerships that we have across the world. And this is a growing phenomenon. Just when the world needed defenders of democracy and universal coalitions against oppression and violations the most, the world is witnessing the rise of ethnic nationalism and a retreat from international collaborations for the common human good. That is what we are witnessing today. Governments are in the race to censor, and sanction professional journalists. And as for citizen journalists, governments are confused as to what to do to make them go away. Some ignore them to their own peril. Some fear them, and rightfully so. Some governments have regrouped though, and are consolidating their powers. Some journalists, if not most, have their digital footprints monitored and used to level charges against them. So striking a tricky balance between human rights of free expression, of travel and assembly, and protecting the citizenry from the pandemic is a Herculean task for truly democratic governments. But for autocratic regimes, it is a pretext to control information, freedom of expression, and right to liberty. We are witnessing in the world today a consolidation of power by the rich and the 1% that controls the wealth of the world. So we have an oligarchy, therefore, of the rich and of some ideologists who believe that it is their right to control all others. So the Bill of Rights guarantees the right to life, freedom of thought, of conscience and religion, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and association. I mentioned those ones because we should juxtapose them with the pandemic that we are going through now, and perhaps the necessity to protect human life because of the spread of COVID-19. How would that impact the right to life? If others believe that they should not protect themselves against any pandemic, are they impacting the rights of others to life? Freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. When it comes to a universal vaccine, some people will refuse to take the vaccine because of their religion or because of their objection conscientiously. So what do we do about that? And then freedom of expression. Do we allow citizen journalists to reveal and propagate information that are untrue about the pandemic? How do we control this? So we have to strike a balance. What about freedom of assembly and association? We are asked to social distance, and we are asked not to assemble in large numbers, but does this violate the freedom of assembly and association? So while we ponder these issues, those who are truly democratic will want to see to the left of this ideology, and those who are autocratic, and we are seeing an increasingly, this is a very, very threatening event that we are witnessing today, that the right is consolidating power against the poor and legislating laws that will control the individual rights that we have been enjoying for a long time. So this is a time, therefore, for the world to rise up again, as we did through the British Empire, giving us the Magna Carta, and the American experience also giving us the Bill of Rights. Now there is the time now for a new development. What we call it, I am not sure. But let's come back to declaring emergencies when there is a pandemic. There must be the declaration of emergency for a democratic government to have the power to restrict civil liberties. And governments are automatic jump at this. So quickly, they declare emergencies, and that gives them the right to control civil liberties. But then how do we get our liberties back? That is the problem. So we have to then fight. We have to organize. We have to join civil liberty associations. We have to be heard. Yes, journalists are trained, but now we live in an era of citizen journalism. So that era is perhaps gone, where we say that information should come through trained journalists only. So we have to devise theories and modalities to capture the situation that we have now. the impact on free press and free speech.
Excuse me. Sorry to interrupt. You've got to round off now.
Okay. We've had surveys by PEN, the Freedom Organization, that out of every 6 writers that was studied, the one will self-censor himself or herself. So there is a need, therefore, for us to identify the fact that we as trained journalists, we are restricting, we are self-censoring now because we are afraid of the digital footprint that we are living. And we have government officials who are ready to pounce whenever they see the opportunity. So many writers have become too afraid to even write certain stories, especially the story about the pandemic. Now, I have listed a number of remedies here that I'm sure will be made available to everyone, but I want to pick on 2 of them before I go. The need for us to come together to identify that if you're not a trained journalist, so to speak, and you engage in citizen journalism, maybe we need a disclaimer that all of the organizations, all of the technology organizations will put forth out there that this is for entertainment only, or this is fake news, or perhaps you have an identification that this should not be taken as straight news or direct news from professional practitioners. We need something like that. And of course, we need education of the generality of the people, and specifically of people who have interest in the dissemination and consumption of information. I am sure much of what I have you will read in the conference papers, and I thank you very much at this point.
Thank you very much, Professor Awodia. Sorry we had to bend to the time.
Yes.
Yeah, but the paper will be available for all attendees to take a look at, to read. Thank you so much. Mr. Makinwa, you are next. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Professor, moderator. I will try to keep to time so I can help. So my first 3 slides will just be for viewing, not necessarily to talk through. Can you see my slide, moderator? Just nod, I can see you.
Yes, we can, yes.
Thank you very much, yes. So, let's go to the next one. I'm sorry, my head is not responding, okay. Okay, this is just to show us what the situation is, and this has been described by many of the previous speakers. Now, I just want us to bear in mind that we are dealing in the COVID-19 era. There are several issues at play, and therefore, when I come to my conclusion, you will know why we are in that area. The nature of the epidemic is silent, it's invisible, it is a complicated epidemic, it's actually an unknown epidemic. It's a newsworthy epidemic. Everyone, including social media, is interested in saying something about it, because everybody wants to listen. Structurally, in most countries in Africa, including Nigeria, it is placed at the highest level. So it has a lot of official backing in terms of response. Now, the normative issues of rights and freedom. You see, we have situations where death, fear, contagious epidemic, contagious disease is involved. Therefore, the role of the media as connector and interpreter is a sensitive one. The issue of nationalism comes in. Patriotism, is the media or is the reporter defending the position of the country? The socio-economic realities of our lives are in question because of COVID. So you have a situation where you go back to the classical, almost pre-colonial the media versus the authorities situation. And therefore, in that kind of situation, the government, the journalists, and the pandemic oftentimes will be found in different boxes. And the challenge is therefore to deal with an epidemic, at the same time, protect rights, and at the same time, security and self-interest of the country. So some of these imperatives actually occurred when we had Ebola, they occurred when we had AIDS, and they will continue to occur. It is now more complicated because we have a situation where the social media or social network services actually dominate information and communication services in most countries and in Nigeria. Most people now get their information not necessarily from the media directly, but from social media. And therefore, the rules and the regulations and laws that normally govern media behavior cannot actually be played. I'm trying to lead us to understand that it is not unusual in this kind of situation that the government policy and rules will not be in consonance with the idea of free information flow. Because questions that arise, and I raised a few of them here, we have, and I'm not going to answer them, but we deal with them. We dealt with them yesterday. We're going to be dealing with them all through this conference. Today, who is a journalist? What is a media organization? What is the professional responsibility of a journalist? Sometimes you write journalist and you quote and unquote, because you have citizen journalism, alternative journalism, social activism. So who has duties and who has obligations in this kind of situation? You just oppose this with the political issues that are at play when you have an epidemic, the financial and economic issues, the technology that are in question, the legal powers, and users for information. Now, given all this situation, I want to dwell on my last my last slide. This is where you find that whatever studies you come across will show that anytime there's a pandemic, anytime there's a major disease outbreak in a country, journalism will be I don't want to say a victim, but it will be called into question. The duties of the journalists will be called into question. The rights of individuals will be called into question. In fact, it's not unusual that there will be an emergency law to govern what will happen at that time. How do we prepare for the next pandemic? How do we prepare for the next epidemic? What should be the stance of the media in a way that will guarantee some minimum rights and above all, some recognition of the role that the media has to play when we have a situation similar to COVID-19. I'm proposing therefore that we need a new typology to govern journalism, to govern journalists, a typology of leadership, where journalism or the media has to carve for itself a role of leadership that will draw attention to the need for that institution, because that institution is part and parcel of the major development agenda that any country will have. And therefore, I'm recommending that the values that govern journalism should be clear, ethics of what behavior, what comportment a media organization should have, and therefore the individuals involved, what kind of vision vis-a-vis the relevance of a country or the country's policy and major issues of security should the media organization have? How do we innovate and be able, therefore, to understand that there is a major difference between social media and the established media in terms of responsibility? And finally, what is the value addition that media brings to the COVID-19 response? in Nigeria. And that, going by them, we give journalism a different role over time. And that is not going to that's not going to make, create a situation where journalism will escape the current tension. It's never going to go away, but it will diminish that tension, and it will ultimately provide an opportunity for a resolution in the interest both of the country and of the media institutions. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you very much, Mr. Makinwa. Thank you also for keeping to time. Next is Mr. Jim. You have the floor, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I will not try to dwell on a number of things that have been discussed. Just go straight to a few of the slides that I've prepared. Definitely, the world is facing an unprecedented crisis that goes beyond just the media, but also looking at governments, looking at scientists, looking at public health, a whole array of individuals, organizations, institutions involved to address something that affects virtually all of us. But when you look at the response, perhaps response from various countries, response from, for example, the World Health Organization, there's a guidance that deals with information in the context of pandemics. And this is consistent with the requirements of international human rights law. This guidance also highlights the importance of the states providing reliable information to the public. It emphasizes the importance of transmitting information in a manner that is sensitive to different audience perceptions and concerns, and that is aimed at correction, not penalty. A number of things issues we've had today has to do with situation where government instill penalty on individual, on journalists, even on scientists in a number of countries. And it's also necessary to further emphasize the dependent relationship between freedom of expression and access to information on the one hand, and public health, on the other. So there is a whole lot of issues that are more or less that are interacting. When you look at the media, for example, the media requires content. Who provide the content? For example, in the case of pandemics, health workers provide content, researchers provide content, scientists provide content, but it's an indication that there has to be a whole lot of interaction, linkages, between one expertise and the other. And that dependent relationship is very necessary for us to have a wholesome perspective of our vulnerability, to issues when it comes to pandemics, when it comes to dignity, when it comes to our rights, when it comes to fundamental freedoms of individuals. And unless we have those, we will not fare better. The other aspect that we need to look at is the element of what are our risks when it comes to the pandemic. When it comes to the pandemic, we have to look at who is providing the information, what is the nature of the threats, and the protective measures that people can take. Another element of proper risk communication that we need to look at has to do with an understanding of public and individual fears and concerns that enables authorities to tailor communication appropriately. Do we have appropriate communication in terms of the issues we are talking about? For example, when you look at in the past, for example, we can use HIV/AIDS as a core example. When HIV came, there was initial disbelief and so on and so forth. There are a lot of lessons we can learn from this. At a point, there were issues of AIDS cure proponents that emanated from, in various countries, from Zaire, in Kenya. The Kenya Medical Research Institute said there was a cure for HIV. In Nigeria, we had experiences like that also. But at the end of the day, we realized that the media has a lot to do in terms of how do you weigh the information you are getting? At that time, we did not have the proliferation of social media, new media, and so on and so forth. But we had a situation whereby a section of the media, for example, were promoting some of the issues that are going on at that time. Oh, we had a cure, so these people need to want to take, you know, the kind of the sweat of an African in a way that the West, you know, will push out vaccines against HIV/AIDS and so on and so forth. And we see elements of some of these things here. We've even seen situations whereby countries, you know, presidents of countries like Madagascar came up with a cure for. So there are a lot of misinformation in a way that's, you know, what do you believe? What are the issues going out that we need to look at? The management of rumors is also one key element that we need to really look at. When it comes to rumors, who is going to be the one that is going to address, you know, some of these rumors, and what are the things that need to be done? But the bottom line is like bringing research, bringing science, bringing pandemics into the village square, where the words of the elders is no more sacrosanct. Is all manner of information comes to the limelight, and government has not done a good job, you know, of providing the requisite information to the citizens. So you have a situation whereby you are bombarded with a lot of information that you have to really look at what are the things that I need to do. And we also need to look at what we are dealing with, for example, in terms of the pandemic, as element of behavior change. We need information. We need to understand the information that we are getting. We need to have information that more or less confer on us knowledge to address issues that concern us concerning the COVID-19. But without those information that we require, the right information that really help us to know the things to do. And we also have opposition in terms of people saying that, washing in your hands, using the face mask, and so on and so forth, in terms of their right, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of challenges that we need to really look at. And the key thing is this. We need to look at the perspective of the media, the social media, and the content that is being pushed out. How do we address the content from social media? There is regulation within the regular media. There's regulation in terms of the editor looks at the processes. Before a story comes out, there are processes that has been instilled in a way that an average medium has a way to address what is being pushed out. But we also also need to look at when government pushes out information. We've heard about propaganda issue. This is what we are doing. Let's take the case of palliative. You know, before we even started responding to HIV, to COVID-19, the key issue is palliative to the Nigerian citizenry. So palliative with a lot of funding, with a lot of different players coming into play to address the palliative to individuals. Citizens also are looking for palliative. Oh, you said we should be locked down and all the other. Why are we being locked down? What about our means of livelihood? A lot of things were managed in a way that, you know, it brings out people not believing the information they are getting. So journalism plays an essential role in communication of factual and science-based information to the public. It also enables the exercise of the right to seek and receive information. But the key thing is, how do we manage, you know, the interlinkages between the information we are getting, the citizens that are receiving it, the believability of the information in a way that at the end of the day, it impacts knowledge, you know, on individuals. And these are learning curves that we need to continue to build on, you know, as time goes on. To quickly,
yes, please.
More or less to quickly round up, there's a need to guarantee meaningful participation of all sectors of society and diverse civil society actors in decision-making process of COVID-19 response. When you look at the government response at the national level in Nigeria, for example, it looks like a photo opportunity at times when the response team are making press conferences every day in a way that it looks like a photo opportunity where the voices of scientists are hardly heard in what is really going on. Ensuring reliable, accurate information reaches all by making it available in readily understandable format and languages, especially local languages and dialects. This is very essential considering the level of education, the level of literacy, in the country across Africa. And we also need to look at the COVID-19 underlies freedom of opinion and expression, strongly support appropriate public health responses. And these public health responses will be something that people really understand. And also, finally, the freedom to express ideas empowers individuals and communities, human development, and democratic self-governance. This is very important for us to navigate this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. There's so much to cover that it's I feel almost guilty, having to butt in, but the ground has been laid. There have been a number of issues, questions raised in the Q&A component, and I'm sure that the presenters will want to make one or two comments in response, in addition to the things that the points they've made. But let me just add that generally the picture is we are in a situation, a pandemic, an unusual situation that poses challenges to our communication, information ecosystem. So what we are trying to establish is how is our information system responding to this challenge. Maybe we want to start with, again, Professor Rosen. Actually, I see so many comments, so many questions, issues addressed to Professor Nwuneli that it would, Prof, sir, are there some things you want to say also in 2-3 minutes, and then we go to Professor Rosen, Mr. Makinwa, and Mr. Jimo. Is Professor Awodia still around? Because I can see. Okay, so Professor Nwuneli, Professor Rosen, Mr. Makinwa, and Mr. Jimo. Maybe 2-3 minutes for additional points you would like to underline. Professor Nwuneli, sir.
Prof, kindly unmute.
Yeah, that's what I'm done. Okay. The only extra one to add is the issue of COVID-19. You see, COVID-19 is an interesting disease. In Nigeria, Nigerians, from what I've seen and listened to, do not believe that COVID-19 kills Nigerians. And there's a classic story on social media of a woman in Enugu that an interviewer asked him, what do you think about COVID-19? And he said, and she called it Mororo Moros. He said COVID-19 is Mororo Moros. Mororo Moros doesn't kill Nigerians. Our blood is hot, so it doesn't kill us. It only kills those who are overseas, the whites, and those Nigerians who go there and come back with it, it kills them only. So you can see that COVID-19 has cultural implications. In fact, in my paper I referred to, but I didn't read it, where I said that even though the protocols are there, some of them conflicts with the cultural behavior of the people and becomes difficult to enforce. They go to a burial ceremony, tell them keep social distance. They do not listen to you. They're having a festival. You told them to shout the festival. They say, we hear you, but they don't listen. You tell them to cover their nose with face mask. The face mask now is now neck mask, or what they call it, jaw mask. It's not on their face, it's not on their nose. And they're talking to you. You're in the car with them, so put your face mask, say, don't worry, you won't suffer, you won't die. So there's a lot of cultural implications that our journalists have not, I don't think it's an issue of journalists, but our government has not understood it. They lifted the Western cultural behavioral norms into our culture and implanted it there and expect us to be without the cultural equivalence. And for us to start obeying that kind of rules, people can tell them, you must do this because we die. He said, I've not seen anybody die. He says, America, they're dying in their millions, they're dying in their thousands. Here, it's only maybe one or two. And we don't see them being buried. Until we see them dying, we don't believe it. So issue is a very delicate thing. It's a cultural behavioral thing. And Nigeria as a country, from what I know, have not done enough research or collected enough data about people's behavioral disposition on various issues. I remember some years back, I did a study on Nigerian utilization of hospitals, pharmacies, and the babalawos. You find that most of the Nigerians don't believe they are sick until they drop dead. Most Nigerians rather go to babalawo and get herbal medicine. They only go to hospital when at the point where they cannot be helped anymore, then they go there. But other than that, they spend time in the pharmacy or to the traditional native doctor. So our culture is still a little bit behind the modern medicine. Maybe because modern medicine, people, for example, now, if I start to go and test for COVID-19 in Nigeria, it will take 5-6 weeks. I want it instantly. They ask me to produce 50,000 naira. How many Nigerians can find 50,000 naira to do a test of COVID-19? Zero.
Thank you, Prof, for bringing up this dimension, that we are overlooking. Professor Rosen, 2 to 3 minutes.
Sure, thanks. I guess I'll add to my comments I made in my presentation by saying that the challenges with respect to freedom of the press and freedom of expression that we're seeing now and that I've tried to detail are not new. In many ways, the themes that I outlined were things that existed before, and the subject matter. For example, the first theme of journalists, facing reprisal for COVID-19 reporting. Journalists were facing reprisal for different types of reporting before. It's just that this is a new, particularly pertinent topic. So my sense is in this moment, as our societies and our governments are seeking to respond to the crisis, and what is in many ways, unprecedented. It's really important that we do not become unmoored from the principles that have grounded, freedom of the press and freedom of expression before this, and in fact, actually, really focus on them and make sure that, efforts to decriminalize defamation or ensure that, imprisonment is not something that befalls any journalist for their reporting. These are things that, the pandemic has made even more important, despite the, emergency footing that our governments and indeed many of us feel like we're operating on. So I would say, it's worth in this moment, reflecting on those principles and making sure that we don't abandon them, despite the sense that we are in an unprecedented or emergency setting.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Makiwa, 2 to 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. One of the questions to me is from Comfort Ukwela, who asked who should provide the leadership for the media. How should it be done in a way? We refer to a book by Randy Sheets. The title is And the Band Played On, Politics, People, and the AIDS Epidemic. It's a 1987 book. At that time, Randy Sheets was a celebrity journalist, so to say. at San Francisco Chronicle, and it documented how the media were responding to a breaking, not yet an epidemic then, but a disease that was killing so many people in the San Francisco area, and how the government refused to even pay any attention to that matter. But of course, we all know the history of AIDS and how it became also a pandemic, and the whole world responded seriously to it. The role that journalists played to make that issue become a major political issue, a major security issue, a major a medical issue and scientific issue is documented in so many books. And it confirms that when journalists show integrity and show professionalism to a certain degree, they can force the authorities to acknowledge their leadership and recognize it, and indeed even embrace it. So that's one of the examples. In Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea during the Ebola crisis, the atrocities committed by government on journalists are documented too. Médecins Sans Frontières, what do you call it? Doctors Without Borders, International Press Institute, the UN have all these things documented. But I think over time, a little bit of accommodation was created even in those countries. Today in Tanzania, it is not even possible to report on COVID-19, just like they couldn't report on Ebola, because of a president who said COVID is gone, it doesn't exist here. So what is the role of the journalist? It is to consistently be truthful, consistently show integrity, be honest, show professionalism. And over time, that should play out to define that leadership. There's a second question, if the moderator allows me. It's from...
sorry, maybe you can do that in 1 minute.
Okay, Seyu Santos, about what's my perception about government behavior in kind of suppressing fundamental rights of people and communicating citizens' grievances. I think everybody would be against that. And in Nigeria especially, citizens' grievances are very, very little heard. How do you have a voice? Fortunately though, social media is giving people a voice. A few seconds of video at an event, which goes viral, has given people more power today than going to court or reporting to whoever, the police station, where you have to bribe your way through and so on. So in a way, that's a lot to say about social media. And in this way, we have to say the social media and the regular media have become fused in many ways, and also for the good too. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jimo, you have 2 minutes. Mr. Jimo, you have to unmute yourself, sir.
I think we need to come to an agreement looking beyond even journalists alone. We have to look at the media as an institution. We have to look at what are the key challenges that we face in the media, and what are the key expertise that we need to build. When it comes to COVID-19, COVID-19 is a technical issue. It's in the realm of public health and science. And I remember in the last few years, there was a challenge, for example, in I think New York Times, CNN, and so on and so forth, where science journalists more or less, or science desks were closed. So there is a need for the understanding of the science of pandemics in a way that an average journalist, when you are reporting the issue, you are telling the truth to the best of your knowledge. And there's a saying that the truth shall always set you free. So that even if there is an issue about the reporting in itself, you know that to the best of your ability, you've told the truth. And this requires the institution to create, for example, I don't know how many science desks we have in the number of media institutions, for example. And the other thing is the social media itself. What is the expertise of an individual who posts something? There is one thing for you to post a story, It's another thing for me to believe what you've posted. If I look at it, I look at this is believable. It's another thing for me to verify the content, because in the realm of AI artificial intelligence that we discussed yesterday, I mean, a video can be manipulated in a way that it becomes so believable and more or less point people into a different direction. So there's a need to look at what are the key things that need to be done, what are the strategic approaches that media institutions would need to more or less put in place, what are the key expertise that an average journalist would need to find a way to get. Epidemiology is an area that an average journalist would need to know. Looking at data, how do you understand data? What does data represent? COVID-19 has come. What does it represent for an average journalist? How do you portray that story in a way that it becomes something that enhances people's believability in what you are reporting? And unless we take this discussion further, build expertise, build knowledge, build skills in a way that when you are pushing out any content, it becomes a content that is highly believable, that is highly technical, but people can really look at it and say, yes, I think this is the truth. Because
Thank you
we have
very much. It's a great point. Yes.
Thank you.
It's a great point so thank you very much. Dr. Onuma, I hand back to you. Dr. Chido Onuma.
Thank you very much, Professor June. And the panel, we'll move straight to the second panel, female researchers panel. And the topic is the woman's identity, the media and nationhood. It will be jointly moderated by Professor Stella Okuno and Professor Oluyinka Eso. Moderators, you have the floor, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you see me? I want to begin by appreciating the idea that women were given a whole platform in this conference. You know, these are things we sometimes take for granted, because although some people have said is some kind of male patronizing attitude, but I don't believe that. A culture like Nigeria, this country, where I very much appreciate. So thank you. And thank you also to the organizers for giving us a very powerful panel of speakers.
Excuse me, Professor Stellar. If you can hear me, Professor Stellar, if you mute your video, I'm sure the quality of your presentation will improve.
If I can do
you seem to be having mute your video. You seem to be having internet service challenge right now. Okay, thank you.
Is that better now?
Yes, it's a little better.
Okay,
thank you.
Thirdly, I want to appreciate the co-coordinating of this panel with a young woman, in whom I'm very much pleased. Professor Yinka Eso, I'm glad to be working with you. And I want to appreciate you for the way you are coordinating the women's research panel of the association. You can see the speakers. I will quickly go on. You have seen them there. There's no point introducing. Like I said earlier, they are all globally visible. So we'll quickly go on. I will do the first two speakers. I will moderate the first two speakers. Yinka will take the other two and handle the Q&A also, if there's any. So can we quickly go on to Ms. Pfizer Abraham Smith? You can see her background, really powerful. Director of an institute on advancement of journalism in Johannesburg. And one other thing, the women have come from various parts of the world, and that also enriches their discussion. Can we quickly, please, all of you will speak for 7 minutes?
7 minutes, yes.
Have time. That's okay? 7 minutes each, and please abide by the timing so we can have more robust discussions after your speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for the introduction, and thank you for having this opportunity. I've really been stimulated and encouraged over the past day and a half. There's been excellent speakers on here, and the bar's quite high. I'll be brief and keep within my time frame. The women's identity, the media and nationhood, it's quite broad. Race, the role that race identity plays, also on the women's identity, the role that culture plays, and the interpretation of culture too, especially on the African continent. And then I think back when I was extremely young and still very naive on certain issues that I now fully support. Simone de Beauvoir, in the book called The Second Sex, I'm sure most of you have read it, 1972, she said, our identities, sex and gender, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. I know we will have different opposing views to that, but I thought it's a good line to open with. Moving forward speedily to the 21st century that we find ourselves in now, when we have very vocal voices and organizations of the LGBTQI, and a lot of people are challenged with the definition of what our culture says or the interpretation of our culture. And I'd like us to chew on this and think about it again. It's not something new. I would like to believe that there were always people that were born intersex. There were always people that went through life not knowing what sex they really are. But many of us have been conditioned through society, culture, and religion on how we have to behave and who we are and what we have to conform to. I also think the role of women, many times or most of the time, women's contribution to history gets forgotten or gets marginalized. And I'm also concerned how it impacts on the general outlook of women today, especially when I talk about South Africa. Gender, we have one of the best constitutions in the world. We have Bill of Rights protects us. We have many, many laws. But at the same time, we find that on a daily basis, women are victims. And the court process takes extremely long. And it's quite painful. At the same time, we are giving young women the environment, the world globally gives them the right to express themselves, to be who they are. And I can go on about that. I think that's a discussion completely on its own. I will stop there on that. Because like I think race and all of that has an impact, and culture has an impact on the woman's identity. And then when I look at the media's role, yes, we talk about equality. At times we also talk about gender equality, and we get quite excited when we see a number of women or the increase of women being elected to parliament, for example, or taking up senior positions within corporate companies. But many times too, you see the challenges these women face. There's no real infrastructure that gives support to those women to let them be the best that they can be. There are many, many challenges that they face on a daily basis. And many times, we as women too don't give those women the support that they need. And we just had an interesting episode happening here about a week ago. A very well-known tombstone carver passed away, and he's left a great legacy behind in terms of burials, what the grave should look like and the decor of it. And at this place, at his memorial service, his wife got attacked by another woman who happened to be the sister-in-law on her behavior. It was on a public platform. It was televised. It was on social media. A lot of people are joking about it today. No one has given a voice to the woman, the widower who was attacked. But at the same time, again, what it showed me was that the long way we have to go on how we as women support women, but also how as we as women entrench the roles of patriarchy and not matriarchy. And when we look at the media, COVID-19 pandemic has increased and has exposed what was already happening within the media landscape. Within the media landscape, especially in South Africa, media houses were downsizing because they were not making as much money as they would love to make. Advertisers would advertise what they like or what they want to see. But also what has been happening before COVID-19 pandemic in South Africa specifically, media houses were already downsizing tremendously. They were especially targeting senior journalists. So we have a huge pool, over 5,000 journalists, mid-40s upwards, that has been retrenched strategically and systematically. And all of this was put down to profit shares. But what it has done to, it has left young entrants, graduate journalists coming in, not having the shadowing, the mentoring, the coaching, the nurturing that is needed to ensure that what the media puts out on a daily basis is relevant to citizens, is relevant to information that we can digest and that can empower us. We have many challenges within our democracy. We can see that our education system is a complete failure. And we talk about it in theory, but we are leaving millions of students behind. They will complete a 12-year education and they will come out of school, like we say, illiterate. But those are the majority of the disadvantage already that's being left behind. So the challenges for journalists is, what are we doing about this? Why do we decide on what stories makes the first page, makes the front page? And in many cases, when I take the media and I look at it on a daily basis, if someone gets murdered, that makes the front page. If there's a heist, that makes the front page. And many times there are excellent and good stories, and that does not make the front page. So it still shows how the market share works and what sells. But I also think we should not forget, we've got a very powerful medium, which is called community media. And even though on the one side, we've got mainstream media downsizing, mainstream media faced with a whole lot of challenges, we should look at the other opportunities that it's posing to us. So if we work three-pronged, we can work with the mainstream media, continuously upskilling the young journalists, but clearly focusing on what is it that should be a priority. And I think as a training institute, for us, it's illicit investigative journalism, specifically the illicit financial flow, leaving the continent. I think there was Dr. Dorothy Gordon who spoke yesterday, and she spoke at length about our mineral resources and the wealth this continent has, but how much resources are leaving this continent on a daily basis.
Right, Ms. Faiza Abram-Smith. I'm sorry that I have to be the one with the whip to say we need to cut just there. Thank you so much for the most insightful paper that you've presented. And I'm going to hand over to Professor Okuna as she introduces the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Faiza. There's no doubt that the media, sometimes I really wonder who we are as women, our identity. And as you said, and everybody knows, the media are really at the center of clarifying all that. Can we quickly go on and hear Ms. Edwina Orowe? Edwina, are you there?
Yeah.
Hey, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Can we hear you?
Yes, we can hear you, Edwina.
Awesome. Can I be able to share my
Please
presentation,
speak up,
please?
speak up. The last one wasn't very audible. Please speak up when you do.
All right. Can you hear me? I believe I'm audible enough. Yes?
Yes,
Yeah.
you can
Awesome.
share your screen. You can
Awesome.
share your screen, please.
Okay, great. 1 second. Share my screen. There you go.
And I'm going to use, whilst you're doing that, I'm just going to call your attention to my timekeeping. You might hear a little tinkle of a bell saying it's time to round up.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Okay. So yeah, I'll spend my time wisely. Don't worry. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak in front of very distinguished academics and professors. Yeah, so I thought to reflect using what I see in the media every day and maybe some of the lessons that we can draw from that. I was born a while back, 35 years ago. When I was born, you can see your screen. There was, these are the kinds of advertisements you'd see. Energy giving blueband margarine for your family. And there's a mother there holding the bread. And at the very bottom corner, you can see the boys holding the cup and celebrating. And then today, 30 years later, we can see a father advertising milk and showing their strength to their daughter. And then at the very end of that, we can see that is an advert of MTN Uganda, and the title is Falling in Love with MTN. And there's a man there looking at that lady, okay? Then I move over and I think about the print, and I hope you can see my screen. It reads, and these are stories I've actually picked from mainstream media. Okay, so Rachel Shebesh almost broke my marriage, Mike Sonko. That is the current Nairobi governor and a former women representative. And what, if you look into that story, it says Mike Song, the current governor, is being praised for exposing this woman who almost broke his marriage. This woman also, as a woman representative, has raised over 350 women groups and youth groups from low-income parts of Nairobi, essentially giving them a livelihood, okay? The second one says, CS Kagwe's wife appointed UK ambassador to new board. This story is about this woman who, by the way, has no title. They just say the wife of the CS. And if you look at that statement, it could almost pass to mean the story is about the cabinet secretary and the UK ambassador. But the story is about the appointment of that lady, okay? Uganda Health Minister criticized for not wearing a mask in public. Dr. Jenna Singh is the reason Uganda has been able to manage the epidemic. This story was actually trending, that was picked by VOA News, okay? And if you listen and read, everybody thanks the president of Uganda for having been able to. Then there's a press release there. Professor Bitange Nemo joins Growth Africa's supervisory board. If you look at the second and the fourth bullet, the intro in the one for the CS's wife, it reads, the CS's wife, I wish I could just project it for a bit, but for the sake of time, I will not do that. It reads the wife of the CS to who is related to who is related to who, okay? The one on the Professor Bitange Demo says he is an accomplished entrepreneur, ICT guru, and all those kinds of things, okay? Moving on. When I go into radio and FM stations, I don't even want to start to build the narrative. In East Africa, and just East Africa here, just meaning Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, we have about close to 800 FM transmitters, okay? What are the narratives they are taking out? We are in the era where, in as much as we have technology, FM stations are booming in this side of the world. TVs and soap operas in the era of Mnets and things like that. What stories are we telling of our own? And how are those stories communicating the place of a woman? I don't even want to get into social media, YouTube, Twitter, Wi-Fi, Instagram, the sexualization, the objectification. I think that's a new word I'm formulating as I speak, of women is, you can't begin to say, okay? What are we reading in novels? Have you ever sat and think about all the books you've read, stories you've read? What happens to the female character who wants to step out? Okay, that's it. So now, quickly, I will go to, that is what we are seeing, that is what we've seen. What are we saying in all this? I want just to draw a couple of things. Our media is sexist and present sexist community attitudes, okay? And this is what continues to cement the stereotype around gender. What can a woman be? What should she be? How can she be? What is her behavior? What is it about her? Does it not, I'm sure it comes as no surprise that if you read novels, so many, and stories that are told, you realize that any female character who's who can be a radical or would be a radical would be removed, okay, and would end up, does not always end up well, ends up in some sort of punishment or whatever. You can go and check. Women are objects in the media. I think more than anything else, the norm of today, they objectify vulgar language. I mean, it's all about that which will sell. And fortunately or unfortunately, the idea of sexism and sells in these times, okay? It is much easier and almost normal to castigate women. The Uganda example I've just given. This woman is not trending. And we know that Uganda is having COVID-19 under almost, they only just have now recorded 20 deaths. In Kenya, we have 567. That woman is not trending. She is not, in fact, nobody is even talking about the fact that what has she been able to do is exemplary. I've talked about Shebesh, okay? When you think about women are not women unless there are other aspects. Women cannot be independent. They cannot be standalone. The example of the CS's wife, nobody said in any of that description in mainstream media, nobody said that she led the first women enterprise fund in Kenya, that she has initiated and nurtured so many SMEs, small and medium enterprises, okay? Nobody's talking about that. And we are social, so one second. So what we are doing then, women's roles and contribution is often last. Look at all the articles, all the everything, all the anything. The last line will always read, oh, by the way, for the last 6 years, she has been doing this. For the last many years, she's been doing this. What happened to that as her identity, as her contribution? Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Forward, just 1, 2, 3, I swear, 3 minutes, one minute.
No,
so
30 seconds. Let's make it 30
seconds. Okay, awesome. Traditional media continues to be critical, even though it's taking its own turn, because that is where that is where majority of our population is, and that is where the place of women is shaped. We need to look at media as an institution and how we can use it to redo this narrative. One of the things I haven't spoken about through in this short presentation is the role of social media. I think social media is great, but it is going to be detrimental to the women's movement and to building their nationhood. Think about the incel movements of the Europes and the likes. This is as a result of social media. Nothing is controlled. Can we go back to the basics is my last request, because we have an opportunity with children's books where we can start to shape a new narrative.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thank you. Perfect. Almost. You know, as it is in Uganda, it is in Nigeria and many parts of the world. Like you said, our media are sexist through and through. It amazes me how little things are changing, how slowly change is happening as far as the media are concerned in reporting women. Then also, for years now, we've talked about the objectification of women in advertising everywhere. It hasn't changed. We are hoping that things will improve soon. Thank you. Yinka, can you go on?
Delighted to do so, Prof. Thank you so much. Thank you very much also for the compliment.
Oh yeah,
Seeing me as a young woman.
In comparison with me, you are young.
That's very true. And I'm delighted to be young. Thank you so much, Prof. Bless you. It's my pleasure at this point to introduce our next speaker, and that's Roberta Communen, who is a scholar with an interest in the creative economies. She's somebody who has an interest. She's based at the King's College London, and she's someone who has an interest in creative economies, has edited a book on higher education and policy for creative economies in Africa. So she's a scholar who has an interest in Africa, and the book, incidentally, as she would tell you, I won't spoil the surprise, so I'll let her tell you a little bit more about it. So please take it away, Roberta. Thank you very much for being here. You got 7 minutes.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation also to talk. I hope you can all hear me. Yeah, I like to share my screen so I can go ahead with my presentation and try to keep at the time as much as possible. Yeah, so sorry, moving this across. Yeah. So as Ringo has highlighted, I've done research on the creative economy in Africa in the past 2 years, thanks to an AHRC funded research network. And you can see on the slide the website of the project if you want more information. In this brief presentation, I wanted to just you a little bit about the work we did, but mainly I wanted to focus on this idea of the creative intermediaries and question how women and gender might play a role within this idea of the creative intermediary. And then finally present a case study, which is very gender-based, which is of a co-working space called Tribe XX in Lagos. So in terms of our research network, for 2 years, we had a research network that tried to bring together scholars across Africa that work on research for the creative economy there. And we specifically engaged with 3 countries. Obviously, we couldn't cover all of Africa in only 2 years, but we had visits in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, and sort of learned quite a lot of interesting lessons that we're slowly sharing in academic output. And yeah, be in touch through the website if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about the work of the network. In terms of the idea of creative intermediaries, I want to go into much details in terms of the literature, but the idea here is really to build on the knowledge of the cultural intermediaries, which is usually, as you can see in this first image, the person that translates content from the cultural producer, whether that's the artist, the writer, or any other cultural maker, to their audiences. And that was the traditional role of the cultural intermediaries, the sort of translating cultural content and filtering cultural content. We instead want to talk about creative intermediaries because we want to capture a bit of a broader sectors of individuals or organizations that work both as a translator and promoter of creative work to their audiences, but also as a system of support for actual work, creative work to take place. So facilitators and people that try and support artists, writers, creative workers in establishing their work or their companies or their organization, therefore building a stronger creative economy for that specific context. In the context of Africa, for us, it was very interesting because the role of cultural creative intermediaries seemed to be also stronger due to the fact that there is maybe less policy presence in this sector. So intermediaries are a bit more free to obviously try to find a way to make the creative economy work in those specific countries. And also there is definitely a value of the informality, the networking, the building together, which we found across many African countries. So here there is a bit more details about the methodology. I won't go into details on that, but we have a paper that is drafted. And if you're interested in finding out more, I'm definitely able to share that paper with you. What we found out is that with the title Creative Intermediaries, we can actually highlight a range of organizations and individuals. And what was interesting is that they all have very different business models. Some were public organizations, universities, some were private businesses, some were other sort of businesses or not-for-profit community organizations. They all had different ways of doing things, but they all had very common agenda in terms of how they supported the sectors. And this image sort of highlights what kind of activities they were doing. So as you can see, most of them interacted in at least 2 of these roles. So they're not just doing one thing, they tend to do multiple roles. And as you can see, one of the most, the 2 most important were the networking and partnership role and the training and skills role. But then there were people providing space, business advice, and also finance. So it's interesting to see how the creative economy needs all of these to come together to grow and to develop. I'm going to now focus on the case studies, and sorry if I'm being very brief, but I wanted to highlight what we've been doing. So this is a case study based in Lagos, so probably of interest to you based in Nigeria. And it's quite interesting because it summarizes a little bit of that value we found on the role of creative intermediaries. And the case study has been written also in a book chapter. So again, get in touch if you would like more details. So the case study of TribeXX is quite interesting because it builds a lot on the already kind of acknowledged fact that female entrepreneurship in Africa is really important, really valuable, but also meets a lot of barriers. And specifically in Nigeria, we discussed with this local organization, the challenges are very much also related to policy barriers. So the fact that, for instance, women find it challenging to even rent an office space or rent a space where they can professionally run their business, because usually everything needs to be done with the approval or the support of a man. And so there was this idea that actually women needed specific support in the sector, and if it was coming from a gender-based perspective, it would have been more valuable. And TribeXX started in 2018 as a co-working space, and also the idea of female co-working is quite interesting because obviously co-working has been growing globally, and as a phenomenon has been looked at as a kind of a revolutionary way in which everybody can be happy, co-work flexibly, inclusively. But actually what we find is in most of these co-working places, you tend to find young men, you know, and so in a sort of way, women are sometimes excluded, and especially they are excluded, not officially, but auto-excluded in a sort of way when we think about the age 30 to 50 category, so where they might be having to looking after a family as well or children. So while the co-working as an idea seems to be very open and flexible and inclusive, we found that is not true. And this is where TribeXX tried to intervene. So in their model, they tried to actually provide a co-working space that was suited and catering just for women's need. So flexible in terms of providing support and to respond to those women needs, but also thinking about the women wellness, the community. So again, having a child-friendly sort of space, but also offering them specific skills that they might lack or they might need to develop their business. And finally, which I think is one of the important dimension of this work of TribeXX as a creative intermediary, is that they do all of these, but also mix it with the sort of advocacy and activism agenda. So it's not just about providing those services for female entrepreneurs and supporting them, but it's about making everybody think that this is something that needs to be happening more, and that women need to be given access to more opportunities and treated more equally in general in society. So we thought that this was a really interesting case study for bridging both the intermediary agenda, but also the gender agenda. And as I said, if you would like to hear more about the case study on the creative intermediaries, I'm happy to share the book chapters. But here is just three conclusions about what we found out from the research project. So we found that there is a lack of policy engagement and recognition towards the creative economy, and in a sort of way this has given the ability to some of these creative intermediaries to play a very important role, but also we found that in a sort of way they also need more support. And we sort of in our recommendation is the idea that actually if government and policy wants to do more with the creative economy, they should really think about the important role that these intermediaries play in trying to make the sector thrive further. And finally, obviously, we highlighted that there isn't yet as much research on this area, so it needs to be higher up on the agenda, also in relationship with how these intermediaries respond to issues of access and inequality. And so in this case, the gender agenda seems to be one that is very fit. And the last slide is just to highlight what Linka was suggesting. We have actually 2 books forthcoming. One is in November, and one is going to be out probably in February, March next year. And this first one is on higher education and policy for the creative economies in Africa. So there is a range of chapter years that focus on the role that higher education play in supporting the creative economies, and one that looks at what kind of policies can be put in place to support the creative economies. And you find on the slide, you'll find the link if you want to have more details on the book. And just to conclude, that's again the website. So feel free to obviously check the website and also get in touch there through the contact form if you want any further details on the research.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you so much, Roberta. Thank you for trying to keep it down. I know it was a push to get it down to 7 minutes, but then you've done quite well. Thank you so much for calling our attention to the role of creative intermediaries, and indeed for giving us actual findings on what the situation is on ground, and we can take it from there in terms of how to progress. So we're going from policy and scholarship to more scholarship and issues as we link into the last paper for this panel. Last but certainly not the least, it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Samantha Iwowo, who is a film director. She's also a writer. She wears many hats, including that of lecturing at the Bournemouth University. And it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Samantha Iwowo to unmute her microphone and present to us her paper for this session. And she's got 7 minutes as well. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you very much, Professor Jean. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having me. Hopefully I don't bore you because...
How could you? How could you?
From film into the space of, into the wider space of media to which it belongs, I must say is intimidating, but I will do my best. I'd like to take a spring from the discussions by Miss Faiz Abraham Smith and Miss Edwina Orowe, who respectfully spoke, I'm summarizing now, to the identity of a woman as being constructed in the context of society, of the African society. And Miss Edwina Orowe's argument, rightly so, about the objectification of women in Africa. And when I heard those, I was pleased to have selected a film that has attempted to subvert objectification of women and subvert the perception of what the female's identity in the traditional African society, as well as the mainstream society, ought to be. And I will try to run through it as quickly as I can, bearing in mind that I have 7 minutes. I selected the work of M.M. Isong because I'm particularly drawn to her tendency to, in film narratives, subvert stereotypes around gender and gender roles as prescribed by the Nigerian societies, as well as by the Nigerian filmmaking industry, by Mindspace. And to significant extent, Isong has also fostered this subversion, particularly in her region of the Akwa Ibom, and the perception that Nigeria until quite recently had about females from this ethnic extraction being fit mainly as house helps, housekeepers, whom we pejoratively call house girls. And I think that she has extended this tendency to subvert a stereotype to the construction of women in particular that's beyond a region now. And I'm going to be speaking to one of her works titled Apaye. I will now share my screen to Okay, this is the one I want to share. Yeah. Just a moment, please. So I will be speaking to Apaye. I was speaking about Apaye, the character Apaye in the film Apaye by M.M.E. Song, and I'll be reading it as an exemplar, as an attempt at as an exemplar of the construction of female identity in media for nation building. So more or less, I'm asking to what extent has she successfully done this? And I have come about this thinking from the knowledge that, the understanding rather, that Apaye was commissioned by the child of a woman who wants to immortalize his mother for the formidable work she had contributed in her lifetime to the Ogbia community of the Niger Delta. And I also noticed, as I read the film, MM's attempt to balance sentimentality with reality, and I commend the extent to which she did this successfully, as I will show in the next few slides. And I attempted to also read it on the triangular prisms of postcolonialism, biblical metaphysics, and Africana womanism, particularly for her stance against the tropes of what we typically consider to be what a woman of Nigerian extraction ought to be. I find that this is relevant to the discussion we have here because I see how MM through this portrait contributes to nation building by virtue not only of her celebrity brand capital, which promised and also does still promise to reach a wide range of audiences, as well as the deconstruction of the identity of Apaye in Ogbia. You know, who is she? How does she present this woman to us through her lenses and through the scenery that we come to see in the film? And I am also sure to some extent that it is relevant to the discussion because, as I said, she subverts the stereotype of female construction, as well as the stereotype of what is considered to be the Niger Delta, which quite widely is often perceived as the hub of militancy and kidnapping and oil spills. So MM gets us to shift in our thinkings from those perceptions to a woman and her negotiations of the challenges of her life. And I conclude by asking the question, to what extent has she have identity and nation building been strategically constructed and or advanced in her work? I start by looking at the first I start by looking at the story in 4 parts. You know, I divided it into 4 parts, the story, the narrative. And the first lens talks about her trauma. She's the offspring of a slave, of an enslaved woman who grew up in a poverty-stricken family in the Ogbia community and married pretty early the husband of her cousin. And she thought that it will be a happy ever after scenario until the man would decide to take a third wife, and she would challenge that. Now, what I am also particularly drawn to is MM's authentic representation of the woman's identity in terms of her flaws and strengths. Because here is a woman who comes in as a second wife to the husband of her cousin, but stands in the way of another woman coming in on the heels of her own arrival. And I see how the production does not attempt to erase that from her life in a bid to project the strength of the character, but has brought all this in for the viewer to make their final decision on her. We go on to these are photos, these are screenshots from the story, from the first lens, and in the second lens.
So, sorry to interrupt you, Samantha. I just need to make a little, because we've run out of time and I know that there's still a little bit more that you have. May I implore the speakers, if you could please attend to some of the questions in the Q&A column. I think I've sent some private messages, and I want to steal a little bit of the time so that you can finish. And please, can you finish off in 2 minutes, please, Samantha?
Okay, how many more minutes have I got? 2 minutes?
Yes, please. If you can do it in 2 minutes, that will be grand. And hopefully we'll be able to take some of the questions still. But in the meantime, if the speakers can get on to the Q&A section to answer questions posed to them. Thank you very much. Ms. Carrie, you've got 2 minutes. Thank you.
There is some interference I can hear. I can hear some interference.
Yes, I hear that too. Could we have someone help us do that? Switch off the microphone. Thank you.
It's taken care of. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay. Right.
And in the third lens, we see Apaye's attempts to challenge these stereotypes by way of her divorce, because she would not stand for being a second wife and having the man bring a third wife in. But she doesn't stop at being a single mother. She strives to be a good single mother, despite these challenges, particularly in the 1970s, where such a baggage is not one that was encouraged at the time. And here are some stills from that part of the story, and she also brings in some of the truancy which Apaye's kids got up to in the course of, as a result of Apaye not being home always to be there for her, to take care of her kids, as well as one of her daughters becoming a young mother in her teenage years. So we see a rounded character who goes through all those challenges and arrives at this point where she has successfully brought up a doctor, a lawyer, and other women, and 2 women who went on to become teachers. And unfortunately, one of her children at the time of making this film was still in prison. But brings this to the fore. She lets all of this bubble up so that and leaves it for the viewer to decide about this woman, about Apaye. Apaye rounds up not only successfully raising her children, but extending her strength to her community, raising several children after hers had grown up, and funding their education, providing lunch for them, and generally being there for them. The biblical metaphysical element of my deconstruction of the story stems from her unflinching belief that the God of the Bible would guide her in every decision that she made. And what strikes me also particularly is that in testament to this construction, this portrait by is a crowd of people who insisted on being part of the production for free. And this we can see in the fourth photo to your right. They played the role that they played when she died in 2013. And I just thought to put that up here. So here is Apaye, or Yepaye in full. That's the actual woman who has been portrayed in the film. And I round up with a question: to what extent have identity and nation building been strategically constructed and/or advanced? Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for getting that in before we called you to wrap it up again. I wish we could applaud all four presenters in this panel. You've given us a great deal of food for thought. If I'm going by my time, I think we still have just about 5 minutes for question and answer. If so, I'm going to go. I wish I could read out the questions, but I do. I wish I could, read out the question and answers that were submitted to the panelists, But what I'd prefer to do is having, because we only have 5 minutes left, give each person a minute to address one of the questions that you've picked out, or the issue that seems most pressing in the Q&A section, so that you can wrap up your thoughts properly, if that's all right. So a minute each for each, and I'll start with you, Ms. Abrahams, Fires. Should we go in that order? And then I'll come to Edwina.
Thank you, Professor. The first question was, how do we see the increase of women's voice that can impact, especially much more during the pandemic era? I think we've been seeing that specifically here in South Africa, especially with women teachers, but also in our NGOs and CBOs, that women were quite vocal. For example, at the Institute itself too, we have one male, and not because we're gender biased, it just so happens that we've got more women. But by level 4, we took a very conscious decision that we've got to try and be fully compliant, but to ensure that we don't lose our jobs, that we have to move all our teaching onto an online platform so that we can still generate our income and sustain ourselves and keep our organization going. So that was one of the conscious decisions that were made. What we've also seen is with the teachers, mainly women teachers, that is from early education, primary, they made sure that some of them made huge sacrifices, going to as many students' homes as they could for the classrooms they were teaching, to drop off schoolwork, to pick up schoolwork, where children had cell phones. They tried to contact them twice or thrice a week just to see their well-being, emotionally, mentally, and how they were coping. And I thought that was tremendous. I really felt quite impressed by that. And I think that they should be commended for that. At the same time, we saw a lot of women on our virtual discussions. We had our NPA head on the virtual discussion. We had quite a few journalists from Daily Maverick, women journalists, all talking about the pandemic and especially linking it to corruption and how that impacts on the feeding scheme of children. So that was one way of them achieving it. On the other end, culture, I think it's important that we understand whether we belong to different religious groups or what cultural groups we belong to. I still very strongly believe under all of it, it's the values that we have in common.
Okay, thank you so much, Fires. I think you've kind of taken up that, you started that, and maybe one of the other speakers can take it up from there. You've started the ball rolling on that. So thank you so much. I'm sure you'll be able to give some of the more detailed responses. If you type it up, then our participants can read the more detailed comments as they come along. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. I'll come to you now, Edwina, if I can, please, if you can take a minute.
Yes, I will take exactly 1 minute.
Thank you.
So it's important that we understand that we are operating, the women's stories and the women are being portrayed within an already intensely patriarchal setup that continues to be socialized by a lot of other things, including culture. Having said that, then when you look at why the questions around why are we not telling any more women's stories, why are women journalists not telling their own stories, 2 things to say to that. 1, women are in media, but they're not the decision makers in many cases, okay? Number 2, we also must understand that all these media houses are private institutions that need to make the revenue. And then somebody has got to take a decision on what is going to bring in the revenue. again, fortunately or unfortunately, it is that objectification, it is the advert, it is the all these things that will bring that. In conclusion, just to say, what opportunity do we have to retell the stories? I go back and say that traditional media, this very same private media, are now going through a very interesting time and a very interesting turn because of new media. They need to go back and re-theme, let me call that. They want to theme themselves. And I think stories of women as activists, as politicians, as whatever, allow them to start to tell a new story. And I think that is really a good opportunity that we have to get into and we need to explore. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edwina. Thank you very much for your food for thought there. And as has been commented upon, these are issues that we're still grappling with. The whole, there's a big question about rape, and it's almost as if, where has that ever been? Is it something new? Why does it seem like a big issue just now? But then the sexualization and objectification of women is real, and it's got real consequences that we've got to deal with and tell the stories. So I'm going to move on to Roberta. Roberta, you have 1 minute to please wrap up your thoughts on some of the issues that were raised. Possibly you might want to address the question about culture. What do we think about the place of culture in the construction of female identity in Africa generally? And you've got some answers that you might want to give to that in a minute, if you can. Thank you.
Yes, I think maybe I would like to think that we should also reflect what is the role of the university, because obviously most media practitioners, female media practitioners and men media practitioners will be going through universities, you know, to get to that job. And so I think the university plays a key role at that point in both obviously training female practitioners and giving them the tools to feel empowered to tell the stories that they can and want to tell, and obviously to also empower them to create alternative media's content and formats so that they can do so. But also it is the moment also where male practitioners also there sitting on the next table and could also be convinced and sort of involved in creating more spaces for women and sort of providing more the platform for equality. So I really see that this should be an agenda of university and university campus, and that would really might not make an immediate difference today, but would mean that in 5 years' time, all the people that are producing media have got much more awareness.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that suggestion. Indeed, you're suggesting that HE, the university, polytechnics, places of higher learning, are places where we need to start to change the culture. Perhaps we might want to start, and that kind of resonates with the suggestion from Edwina that we want to start telling stories, writing books for children. So maybe taking it all the way down to primary schools and secondary schools and change the culture, get people to become a little bit more aware, as it were, of what the issues are that we're dealing with here. And it takes the woman to train a child. Perhaps it takes the woman in education to change the culture. Thank you very much. And I'm going to wrap up with, or rather I'm coming to you, Samantha, for your 1 minute wrap up of the session. Thank you. Hello, Samantha.
Yeah. So thanks for having me. And it's been interesting listening to the different perspectives on the construction of female identity and the attempts to subvert it through the media where possible. I see how that can be possible coming from my field of film. I see how that can be possible in the conscious underpinning of our stories with themes on Africana womanism, historic precedents, and how these might shape the thinkings and begin to generate conversations around the topic of how we project women. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Samantha. You've given us even a few seconds to spare. And I just want to say a very big thank you, because we've come today to the Female Researchers Panel. We've looked at the stories, the issues of nation building from the perspective of the woman. and the issues that perhaps prevent the women from playing their part as fully as they can. Obviously, there's a whole lot that we have not been able to delve into. The whole question of social media and to carry on from the previous discussion, question of social media and how that might in itself be a space where women can speak and speak to other, speak to themselves. And what harm are we doing to ourselves? Are we helping ourselves? Are we supporting ourselves as we should? Are we supporting the men and the nation as we should? These are questions that we want to explore in more depth at some other time. I sincerely apologize, and I want to acknowledge Mahmoud Balarabe. I want to acknowledge you specifically. I'm sorry that you're a little bit upset that we couldn't take your questions specifically. It's the nature of the conference that we have. We've run out of time as it is. And I also want to say a very big thank you to our speakers. I've seen some comments saying, oh, we all overran on our presentation, but I know how challenging it is to squeeze the thinking that you have into 7 minutes, all that thoughts into 7 minutes. That's a whole big challenge that we've given to you, and you've done it brilliantly, even though we've overrun slightly. But I want to thank you immensely for your contribution, and I want to apologize and appeal that the more we get the questions written down, responses to questions written down, then the more people like our dear Balarabe will be satisfied. We can carry these conversations on Facebook, please. Let's do that as well. Thank you for having us on this session, and we hope you've had a wonderful time with us. Thank you, everyone. Over to you, Chido. Done here.
Thank you very much, Professor Eso, and thank you, Professor Stella Akuno, for ably moderating this session, and also great thanks to the 4 speakers. Before we go to the next panel, let me just quickly announce here that Port Harcourt in Rivers State in South Nigeria will be hosting the next edition of the ACSPN conference, which will be the 8th annual conference, and that will be in 2021. Excuse me. But also to remind us that ACSPN is collaborating with UNESCO on a book on artificial intelligence. For those who are keen on that, additional information is available on the ACSPN website. The third and final panel for today is Reimagining the Future, Health, Well-being, and People's Engagement. It will be moderated by Professor Oluyinka Eso and Dr. Anulika Ajina. Prof. and Dr. Ajina, you have the floor, please.
Okay, thank you again. I think I'm going to welcome Dr. Ajina, Anuli Ajina. She's from the Pan-African?
Atlantic, please.
Pan-Atlantic, I beg your pardon. Pan-Atlantic University in Lagos. And she is going to be moderating this session. I'm going to defer to her and come in as need be. I'll be the timekeeper, and let beauty and age be, let beauty take precedence over age on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have till 4:10 for this, please. Let's stick to time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Onuma, and many thanks to you also, Professor Eso, for that kind introduction. I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference and all the panelists, as well as the attendees who've been with us in this last 2 days. Thank you so much. So this is the 3rd panel, and it's titled Reimagining the Future, Health, Well-being, and People's Engagement. Like the other panels, we have 4 speakers here, and I'll just mention their names when it's time for them to speak. I do apologize beforehand if I mispronounce anyone's name. I kindly ask you to please make the correction when you do start speaking. Each speaker will have 7 minutes to present their paper, and we'll take a cue from the previous panel where We'll have some time for Q&A and then 1 minute per speaker to respond to the urgent needs from the Q&A. May I please ask all the attendees to kindly use the Q&A button also for their questions, since we're not going to be able to take all of them during this session in the interest of time. Thank you so much. Our first speaker is Professor Susan Goldstein. She is from the School of Public Health, the University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg. Is Professor Goldstein present here?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can I share my screen?
Sure.
If I can find it. Share. Right, can people see that? Thank you very much for, sorry?
We see your screen, please continue.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very honored to be amongst such distinguished speakers. I would like to just start, and I think I'll skip through a lot of the early bits because I know that people know a lot of this. My pictures have disappeared, so I'm going to keep it in. My pictures cannot be displayed. That's very sad. Okay, never mind. The context in South Africa is really that we are ranked the most unhealthy in the world. The picture, which I wasn't able to show, I don't know if people can see this, but it shows that South Africa, in a number of different ways, is very unhealthy. And although we spend 16% of government money on health, we still considered the most unhealthy. We also have the highest level of inequality, and there's a beautiful picture here of what the inequality looks like. We have a very overused, overserviced, high-cost private sector and a very under-resourced, highly challenged public sector, which is linked partly to the inequality. So then enters COVID-19, and what was really useful and interesting for all of us is that COVID-19 involved a all of government response. Now, this was to an illness. And what it did is it emphasized the need for addressing social and economic determinants of illness. So it just wasn't enough to say, okay, we're going to deal with this illness. What they looked at when we declared that the state of disaster was policies in all sectors in order to deal with this issue. And finally, what I found really interesting was people have realized in South Africa that we are only able to control COVID-19 with non-pharmaceutical interventions. So what that is dependent on behaviors, on norms, on living conditions, on transport, on social security and water, etc. So this has helped shift people's mindset considerably. What it highlighted was that we've got a huge problem in South Africa around non-communicable diseases, including obesity, hypertension, and diabetes. There's a lack of basic services. So lots of places just were anxious about being able to cope. We have very poor living conditions. So how do you socially distance? And in South Africa, we had extreme lockdowns when you are living in a one-room shack with 4 children. Food insecurity, people were starving because everything closed down. And what was also very interesting was the role of alcohol abuse in the trauma. So what we did in South Africa was we banned the use of alcohol, and trauma cases virtually vanished. Many of the trauma doctors and surgeons in hospitals said they'd never had such a quiet time. And this was really interesting because when the alcohol industry complained and alcohol sales were reinstated, the trauma cases went up again and the government reinstated the alcohol ban. So it was a very, very interesting natural experiment. So what was the South African communication response? Well, to be fair, they needed very rapid action and in the context of huge uncertainty. And initially, a lot of South Africans really trusted the government, but this rapidly deteriorated. There was a whole lot of online misinformation, disinformation, rumors, but not only online. People, again, and I heard people talking about it in Nigeria, this is a disease of white people, can't get it, Black people can't get it, it's only for old people, young people can't get it, and so on. And there was a huge inability to contact many of the people who needed the information the most. So the government, although they used radio a little bit, well, quite a lot, they used television substantially, but very often what they didn't do was listen. And they didn't listen to communities, and they didn't listen to people who might develop local solutions for local problems. And almost all the surveys were electronic, and it very often left out poor, very poor people. So what we got was a lot of information about middle and low middle class people, and much less about people who were really starving and hungry. So what are the lessons that we learned around this COVID epidemic? I think the first one is that a pandemic or an epidemic emphasizes existing problems. So it didn't create these problems. The problems of poverty, the problems of inequality, poor service, poor communication, lack of trust, and unfortunately fraud and corruption. And that's just been uncovered here where it's been massive. So how do you prepare for a pandemic? And the first thing is to ensure good governance. You need functioning health and basic services like wash and transport and services, but you also need health literacy. And I was thinking about some of the discussion earlier about social media. How do people distinguish the absolutely bizarre rumors from scientific reality? And that depends on a basic health literacy of a population. What do we teach our children at school about health, about what is good for you, what is bad for you, what are germs, etc. A little bit of physiology. The other next thing that we learned was that you need good communication channels. So unfortunately, South African government seems to not have proper health communication. And so there isn't a trusted health communication process that could just switch very rapidly into COVID communication, listening and sending out messages, but also engaging with communities at a very basic community level, engaging people at a basic level. And then finally, there needs to be trust in government. And unfortunately, I think in Africa, often this is lacking. We also learned that there's a lot of goodwill, and there was a lot of civil society stepping in, doing positive things, providing food, raising money, supporting other people. I think that was really okay. I'll move on. Mental health issues. Really, the mental health issues actually were a result of the interventions, not necessarily a result of the COVID. So what is the digital space in relation to this? So I think for me, remembering that the digital space is a tool, is a tool, is a tool. And the opportunities for the digital space have been and are that we leapfrog things like landlines. We use it for online buying, online information for very basic needs as people chat, social media. But voices that have been previously unheard can be heard if it's available. And what we should be arguing for is universal access to data and digital media. The challenges, of course, are that any crazy, nutty idea can get traction. And we've seen that in the US as well as in Africa. I mean, the QAnon group, enough said. But that equity is an issue, and you have to make sure that we aren't excluding the poorest and marching on without. And then my last slide, which I can't display the picture of, sorry about that, was that was just to say thank you. And I hope I can share the presentation where the pictures would be displayed properly. My apologies.
That's all right. Thank you very much, Professor Goldstein, for that interesting paper from South Africa. It's remarkable how you note that the civil society intervention during the pandemic has been significant, has been important. I think the same is prevalent in very many parts of Africa, where the government intervention has been less than anticipated or less than expected. Thank you very much for that. We go now to Dakar, Senegal, to listen to Mr. Jacob Eno Eben, who's from the UNFPA, Western Central Africa region. He would also be addressing this topic, reimagining the future health, well-being, and people's engagement. Mr. Eben, please.
Thank you very much, and bon après-midi. Greetings from Dakar. Just having the video on for a couple of seconds. I'll switch it off so as to improve the quality of the bandwidth. Thank you very much for the opportunity and the invitation you've extended me to join this 7th annual and first virtual conference of the Association of Communication Scholars and Professionals of Nigeria. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I would like to really take advantage. I have been taking advantage since yesterday, and I hope to continue. I would seize the opportunity. I saw my former regional director was on this on the panel. I greet you, sir. I didn't have the chance of meeting you, but it was a pleasure listening to you. And congratulations to all the other presenters. They've made marvelous presentations. It's really been great. I've learned quite a lot. And the last part of my presentation would definitely just sync to what almost all what you have been presenting. In order to the topic for which we have been invited to make a contribution, reimagining the future, health, well-being, and people's engagement. Basically, for us to reimagine the future, we must first of all take cognizance of where we are coming from, where we are at the moment, and what possible scenarios we would play in the future. Scenario building, whether it's in military, politics, business, enables us to look at best case, worst case scenario, realistic case scenario, and allow me to choose best case scenario. And just from a definition perspective, reimagining means to imagine again or to look anew, especially to form a new conception or to recreate an image of someone or something. So one would imagine that a reconceptualization of a new mental picture, particularly in a more positive light, to impress or to conceive or to create a new representation of something. So therefore, the ongoing global pandemic, COVID-19, has brought the world to a standstill, challenged systems and paradigms, and have questioned various systems. It is what, therefore, allowing us to reimagine what the future would look like. I would like to take you back to just a very short history, which is when in 2013, the African Union was commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Organization of African Unity, which is now the AU. Heads of states and government charged the then chairperson of the African Union Commission, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, whom I had the privilege of serving as the spokesperson. She was charged to lead the process where we had to reimagine the vision for Africa at the time, if we will be celebrating the next 50 years from 2013 to 2063, what should we be celebrating? And so Dlamini Zuma led us to the process of, massive consultations, within the continent and out of the continent to be able to help inform what today we call Agenda 2063. And I'll invite the panelists or members of the conference to read the Agenda 2063, an email from the future, where she writes to an imaginary Kwame. The main thing there for me is that Agenda 2063 gave, as a continent, the opportunity for us to formulate aspirations. There are two aspirations which directly relate to health. And of these two aspirations, the first says a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. Goal 1 looks at an Africa where we have high standard of living, quality of life, and well-being for all. Goal 2 looks at healthy and well-nourished citizens, expanding access to quality health services, particularly for women and girls. Aspiration number 6 looks at an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially women and youth. Now, it's not only not only did we go through that process, but for me, what I take out from that is the level of consultation, an unprecedented level of consultation, people-centered conversation that happens to be able to form the vision that we have today for an Agenda 2063, which is an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa where the African citizens are taking their responsibility. Now, if you look at it from a global perspective, you have the UN Sustainable Development Goals, where we have the goal 3, which specifically focuses on healthy lives and promoting well-being of people. My own organization, the United Nations Population Fund, has projected a vision and has created an image where in the next 30 years, we are looking forward to a situation where we would have 0 preventable maternal deaths, 0 unmet need for family planning, 0 gender-based violence and harmful practices, including female genital mutilation and child marriage. We can assess the level to which all these have been attained. We would have all these figures. For me, it's not necessarily important for us to look at these visions. The question here is, how do we galvanize the population, the people? How do we make the development, health, delivery to be people-centered? I give 3 or 4 lessons here, and I'll bring my own intervention to a close. 1, we need to strengthen advocacy efforts to increase investment in health. You remember the 2001 Abuja Declaration, which sought to ensure that we have the government committed 15% of the national budgets. As journalists, as communicators, we need to be able to interrogate and enhance accountability so that governments should be able to tell us the extent to which they have implemented this. 2, leveraging on communications or technologies to leapfrog delivery of health and well-being. Yesterday and today, we've had conversations around technologies, conversations around artificial intelligence. How are we using this to really leapfrog? Internet penetration on the continent today stands at 39%. When we look at the rest of the world, 62%. How do we make sure that we reach the population, the people that we are unable to reach? And the third and final point, my suggestion would be scaling up social and behavioral change communications, where we have a blend between rural mass communication, as it were in those days, and today's social media opportunities that we have to make sure that we are able to reach populations that ordinarily we wouldn't be able to reach out to. So those are my interventions. I look forward to having further discussions. I don't want to go beyond the time. I thank you very much for the opportunity, and we'll come back for maybe further discussions. Thank you, and over.
Thank you so much. Thanks, that's much appreciated, Mr. Eben, for your insight from Dakar, Senegal. It's interesting that you note that social and behavioral change communication is critical to reimagining our future. And we've seen a lot about the social media and how that's guiding so many people to take certain actions during the pandemic. and perhaps also misdirecting many people. So we're looking at some constructive ways of how we can harness the resources, particularly around social media, in order to extend the discussion and the debate when it comes to people engagement. Thank you so much for that. We'll get back to you during the Q&A session. Let's go now to our third speaker, to Nairobi, Kenya. We have Ms. Rayana Rasul. She is Regional Communication Advisor, International Planned Parenthood Federation in Nairobi, Kenya. Ms. Rasul, thank you for joining us this afternoon. And
thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gina. And also just to say thank you to the association for giving me this platform, and to IPPF, and also to my own distinguished panel that I'm a part of. I feel a little bit left out because I don't have a professor or a doctor on my name yet, but we will get there. So, okay, should I share my screen for my presentation? Okay.
Yes, please share your screen. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Can you see, are you able to see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. So, let me just fix something. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I know that we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to shoot through some slides and skip over some slides if that's okay. So I'm the Behavior Change Communication Advisor with International Planned Parenthood Federation in Nairobi, and I'm part of what is called the Wish to Action program. And the Wish project is one of the DFID, well, not DFID anymore, but one of the UK government's flagship program to really scale up support to integrated SRHR, and they work across we work across four cross-cutting outputs, including individual choice, national ownership, access to services, and what we call global goods, which is really about sort of evidence-based innovations and best practice. This slide is a little bit busy, but these are all of the countries that we operate across. We are in lot 1. We have those batch of countries, and also linking it to the partners, but it's particularly led by Marie Stopes. And then in our lot 2, we have the International Planned Parenthood Federation countries that we work in. But I'm going to bring my own presentation back to these particular countries here, which is Burundi, Ethiopia, Malawi, Mozambique, South Sudan, Pakistan, Sudan, Zambia, Tanzania, and Uganda. These are the 10 countries that we're working in with specific social behavior change communication interventions. So why is SBCC a key component of the WISH program? What is it? It's an interactive process, researched and planned process. It requires a socio-ecological model, or at least a theory of change, to understand how we move from one space to the next. We also have, we work through 3 key specific interventions, looking at advocacy, social mobilization, and mass media, and how they interface with one another to deliver synergistic messaging to different target audiences. Our key target audiences for the WISH program is really people living in poverty. We have young people and adolescents, and especially, and also people living with disabilities. To date, we've done some research across the program. The program started in 2018. We've done some social norms research, but really looking at how social norms are shifted and how they can be measured, and happy to share this information with people afterwards as well. We've also looked at some action media research, which has been done by Humanity International, which is one of our core partners, and they focus specifically on, obviously, on people living with disabilities. And lastly, we work with a partner called DMI, Development Media International, and they do all our mass media, and they specifically do really public service announcements across across 7 countries in the consortium. They pre-test and post-test all the scripts and all the productions as well. So how is Wish to Action currently responding to the COVID-19? So the pandemic, it has really affected our program implementation, in the sense that family planning and SRHR was not considered an essential services by a lot of governments across Africa, but also globally. We've seen a decline in SRH service provision, especially for young people who are not necessarily being reached. We have low client flow at facilities. We've had to adapt service delivery to reduce risk, obviously, to transmission to staff and to clients. And then our outreach efforts, especially around youth, have also been stalled. We had school closure and then a lack of mobilization. So what did we do? Well, we developed a risk communication and community engagement strategy, which really focused on different aspects of the epidemic, and where each country was at, we had a different we had a sort of 3-tier layer of approaches. So if your country was at this particular kind of lockdown, we would be thinking about this approach. But overarching across all of this, the types of messages that we produced was that SRHR and your sexual health rights and services was still available, and that you were still able to get it. It was not as easy, but you were still able to get it, and that it still remained a priority. We also were able to equip staff, volunteers, and communities, including people living with disabilities, with accurate and accessible information through our different platforms that we had. And what are these different platforms that we used? Well, we had mass media. Through the work with DMI, we worked on adapting our PSAs to the COVID situation. We have an extensive digital outreach, and also currently procuring for a digital SMS data tools to communicate specifically with our community health volunteers. And we've had to move our CHV training online. So we've adapted a face-to-face CHV training on communication, and this is then being cascaded down through our different countries. I'm gonna rush a little bit and skip some of my slides, if you don't mind, because I understand I'm running a little bit late. So, so in terms of the link to services, we have seen scaling back of SRH services, which I've said before, but in all our communications across platforms are geared to the fact that our services are still available. All social distancing is being observed in all of our centers, and any outreach that we are doing, that our frontline workers have the gear needed, and where possible, to please that if people can please call before coming and make an appointment. So the consortium has therefore prioritized these COVID messaging. Also, some key country adaptations. In Tanzania, before, we had what were called weekend clinics, which were mostly for young people to attend, and these were really looking at kind of broader dialogues, discussions with young people. And so we've reduced the number of people attending. Sudan acted extremely quickly in setting up a call center and on hotline, and most of their calls are coming through there now. And they are also working with community distributors to get contraception out to people. So what are the key recommendations? I think I take it both from Professor Sue Goldstein and my UNFPA colleague to say that we need to be listening. We need to be very clear in how we listen. We also need to keep our messaging simple and easy to follow. Use the same terminology. If you're working as an NGO, use the same terminology that government is potentially using so that you don't confuse people. We need to be quick, speedy. We need to be able to adapt fast, but not letting go of the quality or the quality of our product. And yes, and I think that we need to work towards ensuring that women and girls and agency, their decision making, and that they always have a voice, and to focus on their safety and dignity. I think my last word on this is also thinking through how we can be fast and innovative. I think our innovation is what will drive us going forward as well. So I want to say thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you for listening, and there are some of my contact details.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rasul, for your contribution from Kenya. That's very insightful and instructive as well. I like particularly the different perspectives that you've taken to engagement of the people, because what we find is very often support groups like yours sort of lament the situation and identify what the problems are, but then taking the necessary actions to ensure that people have the kinds of services and support or welfare systems available to them is often lacking in certain areas. So thanks very much for that. Let's go now to our final speaker. Mr. Abubakar is lecturer at the Department of Mass Communication, University of Maiduguri. Mr. Abubakar is responding also to our topic, Reimagining the Future, Health, Wellbeing, and People's Engagement. Mr. Abubakar, are you here, please?
Yes, good afternoon, I'm here.
Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Over
Thank you.
to you now.
So good afternoon, everyone. And it's actually a great opportunity for me to be part of this conference. And I also thank the other presenters who have made a wonderful presentation regarding this issue that we are dealing with, the issue of reimagining the future, the issue of well-being, health, and people's engagements. I would like to start by saying that my presentation is going to be in three components. That is, I will try to look at the concept of well-being, then I will talk a little about the issue of the issue of the people's engagements. Then finally, I will look at the issue of well-being and the people's engagement from the Northern Nigerian perspective. We all know that other presenters have laid the foundation while they discussed the issue of the well-being, but it would be good for us to also look at the issue of well-being as mental and emotional stability. It's talk about the issue of physically fit or fitness and being happy. And all these actually are part of the things that affect the entire global community at the present situation. We all know that when we talk about this issue of well-being, there are certain domains that we need to look at. That well-being also involves the issue of physical well-being. We talk about the interpersonal well-being, and also look at the skills and the knowledge that people have in a particular geographical location, and how all these domains or space collectively work together to make people fit enough to make a desired contribution for their current environments, for their present situation, and also how they should also use the skill and knowledge for the future. In other words, it is the level of well-being, the level of physical, interpersonal, and skilled, as well as the knowledge they have today, that will help them to reimagine the future. Whatever happens today will determine what will happen in the future. So in that case, in all this, they will work together to ensure that there is a future for our community. And the well-being also deals with the issue of interaction and the issue of communication. And we all know that these kind of things actually affect the community at this particular moment when the COVID pandemic is ravaging the entire global community. I want to specifically talk about this issue of well-being from the Northeastern perspective, especially the Borno State, Adamawa, Yobe in Northern Nigeria. We all know this part of the country is hugely affected by the Boko Haram insurgency, though there are other conflicts that happening in Africa, especially in the horns of Africa, like Somalia, and relatively Kenya, and you all know what is happening in southern Sudan. But the issue of Boko Haram insurgency has seriously devastated the entire northeastern Nigeria, to some extent even the northwest Nigeria. And this particular thing certainly will affect the way people will live in the future and how they're able to think about the future. Will they be able to even cope with the contemporary challenges and be able to think about what will happen in the future? So in the northeastern Nigeria, we have huge, large number of internally displaced persons who have been sacked by the Boko Haram insurgents from their communities, from their localities, who cannot even think about who they are, not to talk about how they will be in the future. So in other words, their well-being has been seriously affected interpersonally. Their well-being has been seriously affected in terms of psychological well-being, in terms of the skills and knowledge they have to respond to the present situation and think about the future. Even though there are a lot of interventions that have been coming from the international agencies in order to support them psychologically, to support them in terms of skills and acquisitions. But all these cumulatively have not changed to some extent how people in this particular part of the world actually reside. And this has played significant role in the issue of the COVID-19 situation. The people, they are unable to respond to most of the things that set aside by the world community, especially the WHO, the COVID-19 protocols, social distancing, using hand sanitizers and all other things. They are unable to respond to that. And partially why some of them have not done that, because there are researches that have been conducted, and currently there is also research we're working with WHO on that, why people do not comply with these issues, especially people within the internally displaced camps. One is the issue of access to information and access to technology that we've been talking about, and the knowledge on how they should be able to access these information facilities and infrastructure. As I said earlier, even though the non-governmental organizations, especially the INGOs and the government agencies, have been doing their best or doing some extent to inform the people about the existence of this pandemic, and also support them to be who they are and who they will be, but the information is not that actually very much communicated to the people in the internally displaced camps. And there are also locations that are hard to reach, where you can't have even access, you don't have access to internet, you don't have access to electricity, you don't have access to most of these means of information communication. The traditional channels of communication, radio, television, not talk of newspapers, do not reach to such a location. So they are entirely handicapped in terms of information about health, information that they can enrich their psychological well-being and things like that. So we can say that from this part of the world, the issue of reimagining the future by the people being affected by this insurgency is not well in order, because they don't even, most of them, they don't even know who they are. They only think about now, the present minutes, they don't think about tomorrow. So reimagining the future will start when people have their psychological well-being intact, when they have the skills and knowledge. So in recommendation, I can say that there is need for more information dissemination and the provision of technological infrastructure to some of these affected communities, for them to get required information, for them to respond to such information, so that they should be able to think about the future well-being. And if these things are not done, it means a significant part of Nigeria will be totally out of access to record information, and they may not be able to contribute to the success of and development of the country, and even to development of wider society or the globe in general. Because there are people who have the talent, but that talent has to be, excavated. But the information, the communication technologies are part of the infrastructures that we can leverage to excavate such kind of potentials and capacities that people around in this area have to contribute to the global community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abubakar, for that. So we've had our 4 speakers. I hope I can still be heard. Okay, we've had our 4 speakers on this panel on health, well-being, and people's engagement. And we're all concerned, of course, naturally we should be, about health, because it's a public health pandemic that has put us where we are now in the virtual space, having our conference here as opposed to holding one physically. So yes, our concerns, some agitations in several quarters are rightly placed, and we can't speak too much about the need to examine what the future really would be like. I've heard the speakers talk about the obstacles to people's engagement, the various initiatives that are in place. Of course, we certainly can have more and put them in place to reach those who would not normally be reached through the traditional means of disseminating information, as well as the social media. And so we need to begin to think about how to reach all of those people. The last speaker has spoken about displaced persons, and we have lots of them all over the continent. So we really need to continue thinking about these questions and how we can reach more people in order to assuage feelings or dissipate all kinds of anxieties that people are currently facing now, because no one knows what the future exactly would be. There are questions I see coming in already, and I would like for the speakers to please take a look at the Q&A button as well as the chat buttons also. And I would give each of you a minute also to respond to these questions, please. I see that Mr. Eben has responded to the one asked by Professor Ogwezi. So when it's your turn to speak again, would you kindly highlight some of these points that you have already discussed for the benefit of those who are not looking at the chat buttons? So I would like for us now to see what's our future, what's the way forward? What are the kinds of obstacles we have when we talk about people's engagement? Our third speaker spoke about listening, Ms. Rasul, and that was very interesting because we also need to listen to the people that we are working with, to those who we're trying to provide solutions for, rather than just, bringing down that already thought about solutions we think are required for their problems to be solved. There's a question here that says, what are we doing wrong in not achieving global aspirations like health for all by 2000 and MDGs by 2015, as well as SDGs by 2030, if we continue with our current approaches? So what must be new in order for us to have a better future that's safeguarded and that can, withstand whatever pandemic we have? So can we begin with the first speaker, please, Professor Goldstein? And then we'll allow each speaker in the same order that they presented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks again for the opportunity. I think that the point about doing something different and something new around reimagining the future is that we need to be thinking about health much more broadly. And I think that that's my point in trying to emphasize that health is not really, if we really want wellness and health, we need to change a whole lot of things around water, around sanitation, around various issues. Health services are not going to solve our problem. I think I just wanted to add in a little bit about AI, because I think AI is very useful in health for a whole range of issues. But one of the things we've noticed with the COVID epidemic is that there's nothing that can replace face-to-face engagement of people with other people. And I think we must try and avoid thinking that we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. Can we go on now to our second speaker to respond to this issue of what we've not done correctly up to this point and what can we continue to do in order to attain all of the goals that we have quite well set for ourselves. And please respond to any other questions that may have been addressed to you as you speak. Mr. Eben, please. 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be very quick. The first thing is that, one, we have a challenge of planning on the continent. Two, when we do plan, we should implement. We should implement to the fullest of the capacity. If we plan to have 15% investment in health, we should be able to do that. I read a report, I think must have been written by a Nigerian journalist sometime in April, where the journalist was reporting that 19 years after the Abuja Declaration, fewer countries can really boast of having implemented 15% into health, particularly into primary health. That's a challenge. Two, we've talked about populations that cannot be reached. We should step up advocacy to make sure that we are able to reach, and advocacy should be sustained. It should not be one-off, where you have meetings or you call governments to order or you call international NGOs or the UN to order and you leave it there. So we need to be able to have a breed of journalists or communications people who should remain on the job and make sure that we do what we've planned to do. We put the resources or we put your mouth where your money is and to report accordingly. And to make sure that we don't divert resources. In some countries in West Africa, we are already diverting resources from health into defense and security because of obviously security challenges. But we need to be able to really make sure that we don't wait for the rainy days to be able to start, running helter-skelter to do what we need to do. Now is the time to put in the resources and to ensure universal health coverage, including issues of sexual and reproductive rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. We're moving on now to Ms. Rasul, and would like to hear your comments on what needs to be done differently going forward in terms of reimagining our future. What can we do to change the existing narratives and make them more wholesome in terms of implementing what, as the last speaker said, we have actually outlined for ourselves? Ms. Rasul, please.
Thank you, Dr. Gina. So for me, I think governments need to be a lot more people-centered. I think we need to, adding on to that, I think we need to create a system that actually seeks to be gender transformative, that seeks equity and equality, that provides that to every single citizen in that country, across this continent, across the world. Because if we're not going to get any kind of universal health care if we're not looking at equality or equity for people. So, and especially for women, I think we face multiple challenges, especially in African countries, where I've seen that firsthand, where your body is not your body, somebody else controls it. And I honestly feel that we need to, I take the point from the previous speaker, Eben, about advocacy. I think we need to stop being armchair advocates and work towards, and what's the new one where you click a like and then you're an advocate on social media these days. So I feel like we need to take our messages in different ways, different innovative ways, to governments as well through this advocacy. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. I hear you talk about we're getting the government to do more than they're already doing. Yes, the government is there to help, but I think, and well, with evidence to show that sometimes the governments in the various African countries fall short of their expectations. And so we really need to continue looking at the private sector to intervene, as well as, I mean, the rest of the civil society, of course, as they have so well been doing in some countries. But a lot more needs to be done, as we see. Mr. Abubakar, please, final comments on future directions, what we need to do better in order to advance our cause for better health for all. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. What I think we need to do is that African countries, and particularly Nigeria, are increasingly affected by conflicts. And we all know that in Nigeria, day in, day out, there are a lot of conflicts, and these conflicts are coming up with a lot of challenges that can affect our future existence. So the government and indeed the people should realize that peace is fundamental and we need it. And that can be achieved with proper communication strategies and implementation. In other words, what we really need, there is strong communication strategies in all the interventions that we make, whether it is in health sector or in agri or whatever sector, we need that proper communication strategy, and the strategy should be implemented. And at this moment, we need to concentrate about the issue of conflicts, because it's affecting our existence, and it's affecting women, it's affecting children, affecting everybody. So African countries should have a proper communication strategy that will deal with this monster that is affecting us and trying to threaten our existence. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent point. I want to thank all the speakers on this panel. Your contributions have been so rich, so useful, and we can continue this conversation on Facebook and other social media platforms that we have. Just to summarize, because we now have to wrap up the session to get on to the next program, the next activity on the program. This session on reimagining the future, health, well-being, and people's engagement has seen perspectives from 4 African countries, thanks to our speakers from South Africa, Senegal, Kenya, and Nigeria. And we've identified what the obstacles to our health and public engagement are. We now need to chart a path for the future. I like the ideas that have been shared here. Communication campaigns are important, but we need to make them much more inclusive so that we don't become victims of our own problems. We need to think much more broadly, as Professor Goldstein said, about what health means and cater to all of the needs of water, good health, shelter as well. We need to implement, and this is where I think the media come in, and we who are communication scholars and experts and practitioners also need to be much more in the front line in terms of disseminating the information, the right information, of course, when it comes to our health. We need to sustain advocacy, as Mr. Eben has said. It shouldn't be a touch and go kind of approach. A one-off is certainly not enough, and these kinds of strategies we have around communication need to be integrated, from various perspectives and angles. And then, of course, gender equality is crucial in order to attain good health and well-being for everyone. So I thank you all for your input. I thank those who have asked questions here. I apologize if your question was not addressed directly, but like I said, we can continue the conversation online. And I do hope also that the ACSPN Secretariat will share the contacts of all of the speakers so that we can take these conversations forward. Thank you very much, everyone. And I want to thank Professor Esau also for her assistance in this panel. And I hand over now to Dr. Onuma. Very many thanks to the panelists.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ajina, for ably moderating this session, and many thanks to the 4 presenters. We're gradually coming to the end of the program, but before I call on Dr. Rukaya Aliyu to give her closing remarks, let me inform us that the next annual conference of the Association of Communication Scholars and Professionals of Nigeria, the 2020 conference takes place in Port Harcourt, Rivers State, South Nigeria. And the date is September 1, 1st and 2nd, 2021. I also like to inform us that because of time, the conference communique will not will be read during the AGM, which holds immediately after the closing remarks, and everybody is welcome to join the annual general meeting of the association. Finally, I would urge us all to complete the conference feedback instruments that have been shared. So I'd like to call on Dr. Rukaya Aliyu. She's the Vice President, ACSPN Northwest Zone, and a lecturer at the Department of Mass Communication, Bayero University, Kano, Nigeria, to give the closing remarks. Dr. Aliyu, please.
Thank you very much, sir. Can you hear me very well?
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to wrap up this very resourceful intellectual engagement. For me, it has filled the learning gap created by the COVID-19 lockdown, stay at home and what have you. So I think it's really worthwhile and commendable. It's really heartwarming. I want to say a very good morning, afternoon and evening to everyone on this platform, depending on where you are. It is really heartwarming that we have been able to key into the new normal, where we hold this conference virtually, which is our 7th in the series and first to be held virtually. On behalf of ACSPN, we thank God Almighty for the blessings and for making this possible at this time. To our all-time partners, UNICEF, UNESCO, APCON, and all others, we really appreciate and value our partnership and hope that it works strong and stronger for better engagements. We wholeheartedly appreciate our keynote speakers, moderators, discussants, presenters, and all participants. The turnout is really impressive and appreciated. To our diaspora participants who had to set alarms to be part of this, we really, really acknowledge that and you are appreciated. To Dr. Chido Onuma, yours is extra special, sir, because you just didn't have to wake up at the middle of the night to be part of here, but you coordinated the program right from start to the end. That is really, really appreciated and commendable. We also acknowledge the commitment of our board of trustees and the leadership of the association, which is led by the president, Professor Lai Osho, and his deputy, Professor Patti. His 6 vice presidents are also appreciated, so also all other members of ESCO, distinguished scholars and professionals. This wouldn't have been possible without the untiring effort and commitment of our able and very energetic and vibrant General Secretary in the person of Professor Nosa Owens and his lieutenant. People like Dr. Ifi Ademosun. She has been really, really up and doing, and we thank God that this has been a success. Thank you for sacrificing on behalf of all of us to plan and execute this. We really appreciate you. With this, we thank everyone for being part of this history. And for us, truly the future is here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I think with that, we come to the end of the 2-day conference. We would like to thank everyone who participated, and we urge you all to remain and join us in the annual general meeting of the association. Thank you very much. We'll now hand over to Professor Nosa Ibie.
Just a quick announcement, Dr. Shido. We are going to go off for a few seconds, and we'll please beg of you to please join the annual conference meeting in the next 1 minute. We need to do a few technical arrangements for a few seconds. Thank you.
Is it the same people who join with the same link?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Pressy, over to you.
Thank you. So,
all right. Thank you very much, Chido.
Thank you, sir.
All right. I want to welcome all of us to the annual general meeting of the Association of Communication Scholars and Professionals. We have had a remarkable conference, and we are delighted, at the quality, the depth, and the reach, of both the presentations and the participants. I want to say that this represents the beginning. Our motto is the future is here. I want to assure us that we are ready to keep on operating on that premise. The annual general meeting will not last up to 1 hour, and we want to be as focused as possible. So we thank you all for staying on, and we would like to first of all take the presentation by the treasurer of the association. My name is Nosa Owens Ibie. I also double as the vice chancellor of Caleb University in Ota, Lagos. Even while I play my role as general secretary.
Professor Nosa, hello, sir, Prof. There is a heavy background noise coming from your end, so I had to mute. Something is happening around you. You need to take care of so that it will stop filtering noise into the room. Thank you.
Hello, Prof. We can't hear you. Hello. Is Professor Nosa still there?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Professor Ayedolma can continue with what was meant to be.
Okay. He's the one presenting, right?
Yes, he's presenting now. Yes.
Okay, Professor Ayedu, kindly unmute and continue, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. I hereby present the audited financial statement of the association for the year ended 31st December 2019. The statements have been audited by the association's auditor and have been filed as required by the laws at the CAC in Abuja. The total revenue of the association as at 31st December was 13,801,500 naira. The total expenses as at the same period as at the end of the same period was 11,245,970 naira. The difference is regarded as the net assets, and the net assets of the association as at 31st December 2019 was 2,555,530 naira. I'll now present the breakdown of these total figures. The revenues. The revenue sources were largely four. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. The annual